All right, Mr. Best, it's 7:30. Let's get started.
Welcome to the September 5th Arlington County Transportation Commission meeting. Item 1 is citizen comment, and we do have a speaker for this item. It's Mr. Jerez.
Good evening. I and other Arlington residents have become even more concerned about multimodal safety in this tiny county since the Transportation Commission and the County Board last met earlier this summer. Reckless behavior has significantly increased over the summer, with electric step-on scooters becoming a hazard to pedestrians and drivers of other vehicles in many areas of the county. Multimodal safety and multimodal traffic mitigation are not priorities of the Transportation Commission. The Transportation Commission typically approves more non-transit multimodal vehicle trips and parking spaces at its monthly meetings. Motor vehicles, bicycles, motorcycles, scooters, and so on. The intent of the county's so-called car-free diet is actually to pack as many vehicles of all types into as little space as possible, no matter what the consequences. Arlington is actually a welcoming community for many thousands more motor vehicles via express lanes, expanded motor vehicle sales, large new residential and commercial parking garages. There is no comprehensive countywide multimodal traffic impact analysis planned by DES and no comprehensive multimodal traffic safety plan. There is little or no enforcement of the county's traffic ordinances by ACPD, except as they relate to autos and occasionally motorcycles. Consequently, I and others demand and expect leadership from DES Transportation and the Transportation Commission to prevent an imminent threat to public safety from increased accidents on the county streets, roads, sidewalks, and trails. And I did talk to the Commonwealth's attorney last night briefly about this. I've also talked to the police, Captain Vincent, who's the commander of the Special Operations Force. And as a matter of fact, it was pretty bad at Abingdon School, where I live, yesterday, and there was an accident caused by somebody texting and driving through the neighborhood after he dropped his kids off at the school, which is common. So this is serious stuff. Really serious stuff. It's gotten much worse over the summer. And I spoke with you about this at your last meeting. It's time to take action. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Our next item is item 2. This is a VRE Crystal City Station update. Tonight we have Sonali Saniji from VRE for a brief presentation. Sonali.
Thank you for your time today on the agenda. I'm here today to talk about the concept design for the proposed VRE Crystal City Station, and also to highlight some of the issues that we try to address in this phase. And I'll wrap up by summarizing some of the public comments that we received over the summer and our next steps. So as you may remember from a year ago when we were here with the update, we were looking at this location for the station. What you're seeing on the right side of the slide, which is the north end of the slide, we have a station entrance that is pretty much aligned right across the street from the proposed new metro rail entrance. There's also a Metroway stop there. It's near the 18th Street and Crystal Drive intersection. What we're proposing there is a series of ramps and a tunnel that accesses the station platform. The proposed platform is shown there in yellow within the CSXD right-of-way. And on the south end, we still have a proposed set of stairs and elevators that go up to a bridge, which goes across the railroad tracks and lands on the terrace in between two office towers in the Crystal Park office complex. Another set of stairs and elevators brings you back down to the sidewalk, the existing sidewalk area, and we have reconfigured the north end of the open space, the park there along Crystal Drive, to provide a wider, more direct sort of route aligned to the existing crosswalk to get across Crystal Drive on that end. What I'd like to point out on this slide also is that a train has been shown at the station, and the locomotive of the train, which is usually on the south end of the platform, is shown on the slide. And as you can see, it's about 300 feet away from the closest residential building. And this was one of the issues that we tried to address, was to move the platform as far south as we can based on the curves and the information that we have today. And we did move it about 50 feet south of where we had shown it before, and we'll continue to try to work on that issue as we have more accurate information through the next few phases. One of the issues that was brought up that we tried to address was circulation and access to the station entrances. On the south end, we tried to align with the crosswalk that exists across Crystal Drive, and also provide both the station entrances are ADA accessible, and that's a requirement. So on this side, we have, like I said, a set of stairs and elevators that provide that. So some of the considerations on this end for this station access was to provide that most direct path across Crystal Drive. We also provided a double-headed staircase, you could say, on the platform that's different from what we had shown before, and that could be the proposed walkway to the airport connection that others are working on. It's not part of the VRE project, but we want to make sure that we don't preclude that, and we continue to coordinate on that idea. The bridge is going to be a covered bridge with mesh walls. It's not air conditioned, but it is covered in protection from the elements as you walk across. It lands on the existing terrace level in between. It's a one-story high terrace in between the two office towers. As far as the reconfiguration of the open space, we worked with our stakeholders, with JBG, the property owners, and Arlington County to make sure that it was okay to remove the parking along that edge, along the short edge of that open space, and also provide a new sidewalk along the north edge of that driveway so that there is a continuous ADA accessible sidewalk to access Crystal Drive for people going north. And as you can see, the boards in front of you, these are just some snapshots from the model that show the entrance. On the north entrance on our website, we also have a walkthrough for imagining people accessing the station platform from this entrance as well as from the other entrance. On the north end, we looked at circulation again with a view to segregating the existing conflict between bike traffic and pedestrian traffic. We expect most of the VRE riders to be walking, to be pedestrians. We do have some bikes, but very few. And looking at the existing bike path, trying to have as little impact on the water park and stay within the area of where the existing bike and pedestrian path is today. We are making no changes to the existing tunnel. The bike and ped tunnel will remain the same, but we are providing a new tunnel to access the VRE station just to the south of the existing tunnel. And this was one idea of how we could have done the circulation. With this one, a couple of things to note. We were taking it up a little bit more space of the water park than exists today. And this was to try to align it with the proposed crosswalk across Crystal Drive that aligns with the entrance of the JBG Smith building. It's part of that project, and we were trying to align with that. A second option that we looked at was to angle the pedestrian walkway a little bit differently and take up less of the water park, and see if people were, how easy it would be to cross at the existing crosswalk on 18th and Crystal Drive. We felt like this was not as good an option as far as crossing Crystal Drive, with more sort of more chances of people jaywalking right across there, and we do feel the crosswalk is a good idea. But what we have proposed is moving the crosswalk slightly slightly south, closer to the 18th Street intersection, so that it's directly aligned with our proposed walkway and bike and ped path. And considering that a lot of people would be going towards the Metro Rail station, we feel that might be a better option. We believe Arlington County has proposed that this would be a hawk signal initially, and then once the VRE station closes, the existing VRE station closes, and the crosswalk at that end can be closed down or taken out, this one would be a fully signalized intersection. So what this does also is provide an ADA accessible path to the Mount Vernon Trail connector, which does not exist today. And again, these are a few pictures from the model that show the experience of walking down the ramp towards the tunnel. The two tunnels are clearly visible there, and the platform experience. I'd like to highlight some of the issues that we heard from residents and other stakeholders, and to assure you that we have been taking a look at those, and we're still in the very early stages of design, so we'll continue to address issues as we go along with the details. As far as noise and vibration, we did take a second sort of closer look at the study that we had conducted since we were looking at this one platform location. And as I mentioned before, we did move the platform 50 feet further south than what we had shown before, so that when the locomotive stops at the south end of that platform, it will be about at least 300 feet away from the closest residential building. We also looked at the horn blowing locations and the changes to the noise environment. There will be changes to the noise environment, but they're fairly small. This is already a very high noise environment, but we're still within the no impact curves based on the FDA guidelines. Visual privacy was a concern as far as people being able to look inside the dwelling units from the platform. And this is a scale section that shows that the existing geometry of where the platform is proposed to be and the garage and the pool deck don't really allow people to look into the rooms very much. What you could see possibly are the ceilings, or if somebody was standing right at the window, you would probably see them, but there isn't really as much of visual penetration as you may have expected. And this is the closest edge of the building to the platform. The building actually curves out, and so as it curves out, the distance increases, and so again, the angle might get less steep, but you still wouldn't be able to see very much inside the rooms. As far as air quality, We did take a look at air quality or discuss maybe doing a study, but air quality is calculated or sort of evaluated on a regional basis. And so moving the station from where it is today to the proposed location would really not show anything on the evaluation. But I did want to mention that this is an open structure. There are no walls, and concerns about, brake dust or other kinds of pollution are minimal here because of the ability for the pollution to disperse easily. And the station the platform is located within the railroad right-of-way, and this is a railroad use. Also, no additional trains are proposed as part of this project, so there isn't really a change in the generation of the air pollution. These trains are going by this location in any case. The change is that they would be stopping here, but it's the same trains that would be going by in any case. Safety and security is a very important subject for VRE system-wide, and we have many different layers of safety and security that we have on our system today, as well as on our proposed stations and construction projects. We're not quite at the point of having identified, safety technology, cameras, or other technology for this station, but I did want to mention that we have cameras at all of our existing stations. We also have several stations under development, under design, that are further along, and some of the experiences from those stations will be implemented here. We do have a safety and security assessment that is conducted during all of the development projects, and we will conduct the first assessment as soon as we start the next phase. So, once we have a concept design, we can start doing an assessment. But the assessment continues through final design, through the construction, and also into the operation phase of the station to make sure that things that have been identified are implemented correctly. There's also plenty of protocol, including first responder training. So VRE works with responders from the local jurisdictions, including Arlington County. And then there's a COG, MWCOG, Passenger Rail Safety Subcommittee, that also provides that input and coordination. Arlington County does have a representative on that committee as well. So we did have an open house about the concept design and some of these issues on June 6th this summer, and we had 35 attendees. We also had an online survey, and we received 8 comments and received 12 written comment forms at the open house or mailed in after. And some of those comment forms and survey responses were from the same people as well. But we have summarized the comments and responded to the comments by theme, and that comment response matrix has been posted on the project website. But I'd like to quickly highlight some of the comments that we will continue to consider and take into the next phases of design and make sure that we can address them the best way possible. So some of the comments were about minimizing impacts and disruptions to water park, and others were about minimizing conflict between pedestrians and bicycles and really all of the different transportation systems and modes in this area. And as I mentioned, we were trying to balance the two. We wanted to reduce our footprint, but also provide enough separation so that it's easy to navigate and safe to navigate that intersection of 18th and Crystal Drive that is going to be very much more busy than it is today. We want to make sure to continue to coordinate with Arlington County on the airport connection. Now that Arlington has some funding for design on that project, over the next phase, I think we will have hopefully some more details on what is being proposed, and we can make sure not to preclude that. We're working with JBG on whether or not they want direct access to the Crystal Park office buildings, and also whether how we're going to balance security and public access after VRE service hours to the station, and really to the access across to the airport once that actually happens. We're happy to work with Arlington County and the bid on providing good wayfinding. One of our current complaints we often hear is that the VRE station is hard to find. So we can continue to work on that and do a better job. And 1805 Crystal Drive, there are two residential buildings right in the station area, and we will definitely make sure that we coordinate again with Arlington County Police and staff to make sure that we manage any nuisance of the station being there. We currently don't get a lot of complaints, but we do get some, and we'll continue to coordinate and make sure that that is managed appropriately. As far as where we are today, we have completed this current project phase that was funded by NVTA to develop a concept design. We also did an alternatives analysis through this phase, but I wanted to say that we have a long way to go. We do have funding for design for PE as well as final engineering, and about more than 2 years of design left to go. And we are working on trying to identify construction funding. So once we have that, we'll know what the timeline is for the construction. So that might move out a little bit. But hopefully one day soon, we will have a new VRE station. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any commissioners with questions for VRE on this update? All right. Thank you very much.
Our next item is item 3, a bike element MTP update. Mr. Rich Viola is here this evening to give you a briefing. Mr. Viola?
Thank you. I do have a handout of my presentation. If Mr. Best would provide that to commissioners and others who may need it. And I will take a second just to kind of load my item. Thank you for having me here. It was just a few months ago, actually, I presented the last time, so I'm going to give sort of a kind of a quick kind of update to where things are now. There are some things that have been happening over the last few months that I think is worth bringing to the attention. And so the first few slides are somewhat background, since we have spoken about this before. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly, but I'm very happy to answer questions, and we can have discussion as the commissions see fit. So we have our our MTP, our bicycle element, one of the 8 parts of the overall master transportation plan. We began a update just over a year ago, and we're kind of working our way through. The current plan is in need of some update due to changes in technologies, things that seem to be happening all the time, some of which we've been talking about in other forums here. But We are working away right now with our working group led by Chris Slatt, the chairman of the TC, is also the working group chair as well. And just to kind of go through what we've been on over the last few months is working on sort of the phase 2, which is developing sort of the network of bicycle facilities, producing a map, and we're going to be working on somewhat kind of identifying not just the projects, but trying to prioritize them to some extent as to how to move forward with them. Our upcoming activities will be a little later this fall as we start to get into kind of presenting the overall plan to people, to various commissions, to advisory groups, and to other stakeholders in the area, and getting feedback with the idea of going to the county board for adoption of this element this winter. So just run through a little bit. Our first phase was a lot of outreach to get people aware of what we were up to, what we were working on, and kind of having regular meetings of our working group, which is a 11-person kind of group representing various organizations, as well as some at-large members from the county. We did have a county board work session last December. We got a lot of feedback on some policy issues, and that was primarily what we were working on at the time. Some of the things that we heard from the county board was, this sort of desire to have a greater network coverage across the county. One of the issues is we would like to expand upon the types of people who use bicycles for transportation, be it more comfortable, safer and more comfortable for persons of all ages and abilities, not just the kind of the hardcore cyclist. We're kind of emphasizing the importance of trails as both a transportation facility and other community asset as well, and how they need to be upgraded and maintained on a standard of being a transportation facility. And also developing, we'll be identifying concepts for projects. We're not necessarily going to be identifying the exact designs or types of those facilities. I think we're going to leave that somewhat open so that they can be worked upon in detail in those community settings that will follow as well. And so we have done a lot of outreach to groups, have met and presented to many organizations, commissions, committees, and such, and been getting feedback from them. And then in January, we kind of started to work on what we call a framework, a lot of goals and policies. It kind of lays out sort of really the philosophy of the overall plan. And from that, we have started to work on to this second session of the document. Just some of the major items about it. Adding a vision for bicycling transportation in the county, sort of moving on to what we want to make sure we're getting the best possible facilities for bicyclists, not just what easily can be done. It's going to take a little more work in the future, but those are the kinds of things that will pay off in terms of benefits of more cycling. And sort of the use of what we call the low-stress routes, the ones that may not be the primary roads, but perhaps are very close by and are low-volume, low-speed routes, which are the types that most people feel more comfortable cycling on, particularly if they're not a very experienced bicyclist. And also kind of embracing that, as I mentioned earlier, trails being significant transportation facilities in addition to places for recreation and leisure, but they're also places that need to be, facilities that need to be kept up and maintained for full-time transportation use. And then sort of addressing this changing technology, certainly the scooters and the electric bikes and things like that are kind of changing how people are getting around, and we're seeing a big and greater mix of vehicles being used these days, and how do they all fit in, and what are our current ordinances say about where they can be used as such. And then as I say, we're now working on identifying the projects, and we'll be establishing priority. So in our second outreach effort, which was this past summer, we went out to a lot of different locations. We met with people. We had online surveys, and we had some other, we had some workshops as well that were held here. And we got a lot of information from folks, but largely what we're asking about is, where are the key destinations? Where do you want to bike that maybe you don't feel comfortable bicycling now? Where's infrastructure improvements needed? And what kinds of infrastructure are you comfortable riding on what particular types of street and such? And then trying to get a little bit of prioritization, like where do you feel it's most important, what is most needed, and sort of getting some feedback from that from that. And so what we heard from was a lot of people. We had over 600 responses at using our sort of our online survey instrument, and then also at our pop-up events. We had 6 different events, plus we had 2 different workshops. We met with about 400 people and collected information from them on site, and they kind of helped us with putting markers on boards and things like that, so that we collected a lot of kind of graphic information that we could use, as well as comments, ideas of what they would like to see done. Again, and we also kind of capped it off with 2 workshops in the kind of the early part of June. And so we've taken a lot of that information, we distilled it down. The general outreach findings and just sort of a kind of lists of what probably the most significant things we were hearing from people is when we talked about corridors, Columbia Pike always came up #1 as the place that needs the most improvements for bicycling. But we also heard from a lot of other places. Lee Highway, the Arlington Boulevard Trail needs to be improved upon. It has some usage now, of course, but it certainly has some bad links within the overall network within the county. The Rosslyn-Ballston area has a lot of cycling now, and people want to see the kinds of on-street facilities we have brought to a higher standard. Glebe Road, both north and south, is difficult to ride on everywhere from up near Chain Bridge down to Potomac Yard. Pretty much all of it is pretty poor for cycling. George Mason Drive, again, north and south, there are some sections that are very good and some sections that are poor, and sort of making that a very useful and important north-south route for cycling. Walter Reed, again, sort of a north-south route. Carling Springs Road, which has a number of schools and community facilities, but is very, for the most part, it's pretty poor. It's got some bike lanes in one area. But so those are some corridors that generally were at the top of what people wanted to see improvements at. Some of the desired connections, kind of the courthouse Clarendon area down to Pentagon City came up #1 a lot. Often that kind of tied in with the eastern end of Columbia Pike as, providing a link that kind of goes along the eastern part of Arlington, sort of in a north-south direction. Columbia Pike to the Pentagon, Crystal City, getting around a lot of the federal properties is very difficult, very constrained opportunities to get through there, as well as Columbia Pike connecting up to the 14th Street Bridge. People on kind of that end, east end of, or any part of Columbia Pike, just trying to get into the district, it's hard, and hard to do today. I'm making a linkage from Longbridge Park, north end of Crystal City, into the Mount Vernon Trail and hopefully into the District of Columbia, working with the district and other actors as they look at the replacement for the Long Bridge Railroad Bridge. The Ballston to Shirlington area, kind of along and connecting up to the WNOD Trail and some of the other kinds of facilities along 4 Mile Run, also could need some improvement. Columbia Pike to, and any part of Arlington, actually. Bailey's Crossroads came up quite a bit as where a place people would like to go to, but find it hard to bike now. Bailey's Crossroads and Seven Corners, 2 areas outside of Arlington that often came up. And then also sort of the area north of Lee Highway along Glebe Road, how to get from there to Ballston or the Custis Trail came up a lot too. And then access to Chain Bridge from any place, pretty much. It's largely only accessible from Glebe Road in that general area, but Chain Bridge, people feel it's really hard to get to as on a bike. I have had a lot of other things that I collected, a lot of other data that I'm happy to share, but I don't really want to spend too much of your time on it unless you would like me to. Some of our current activities, as I mentioned, we received thousands of comments and suggestions, and we reviewed them and categorized them, and I have them in a number of different documents and sort of formats that people can review. A lot of that is going to be up on our webpage, and I'll show you how to reach that in a few minutes. We've started to produce some maps to kind of identify where maybe new facilities should be put in. We're working with the facilities that currently exist and those that are currently proposed in the 2008 plan. And we're reviewing those first, and then we're trying to identify where beyond that we need to be going, what upgrades, what modifications, and what new facilities are needed to kind of make a better network that is more connected and is more suitable for that sort of average cyclist, the person who may not feel like they are experienced enough to ride on a glebe road or something like that. So this past summer, and we're working on it right now, our working group has had several meetings, including last night, where we started to identify future projects and mapping those out, and sort of we'll be moving towards implementation priorities pretty soon. And we're going to be doing another sort of round of outreach with advisory groups and commissions probably a little later this early part of the fall, I would say. Some of the issues that have come up is in our discussion last night even, how best to achieve the desired connectivity, the facilities and the routes that are safe and comfortable for all ages. So there's a little bit of debate about, what locations and where to do it, and what are kind of going to be the best facilities. I included this table, which is one that NACTO, the North American National Association of Cities and Transportation Officials, has put together. They are provide a lot of the most up to the state-of-the-art guidance on kind of bicycle facilities and transportation design. And so they have produced something that kind of identifies, well, maybe in what circumstance a certain type of facility is warranted based upon things such as volume and speed and other kind of factors. So this is one of the guidelines or guidance documents that we think will be incorporated or referencing in our plan. Also, so how specific should we be about the proposed project descriptions? Our general feeling is that we need to say something to describe them, to provide some scope, but we don't want to get too specific to the point where we kind of lock in a particular expectation that may not be feasible in the future if circumstances don't allow it due to right-of-way or other challenges. And how should the plan call for new facilities along desire lines that may be very difficult to achieve? We know there are some places where we certainly would like to make improvements, for example, access to Chain Bridge. However, some of those opportunities are going to be very, very difficult and expensive. How much should we say about that? We're just trying to kind of work through kind of how I'm trying to think of the right term. Certainly we want to be progressive in our planning and identifying, exactly what we're looking for, to be identifying the kinds of facilities we want, but we don't want to be unrealistic at the same time. We want to make sure whatever we put in the plan is actually achievable. And also, as we know that we're probably talking about a lot more of what we call bicycle boulevards, which is kind of on neighborhood streets for the most part, with some additional signage, maybe some additional features like changing some traffic calming, putting in some traffic calming, or changing some of the throughway direction so that maybe a stop sign gets changed around or something like that. Something to make a route a more continuous and easier to use for a cyclist, and maybe actually give a little bit of priority. We'll be seeing some pushback from people when we kind of get to actually start talking about putting things on streets that are residential areas. That I think is one of the things that we'll have to address as we get into it. So just kind of running through that. So the kind of the schedule from here on out is working on completing this draft document, and I think kind of by the end of October, early part of November, we will have that set. And then sort of reviewing it with the appropriate commissions, and I think this is the commission that is really in the lead on everything, and so it's worth thinking about where this fits into the fall calendar for this commission. I don't know the November date if this should be on that date, or if we want to kind of have a separate time for maybe a discussion about and review of the plan. And then we will be working to kind of share this draft internally. We've been, our DES transportation folks meeting with police, with parks, some of the other county agencies too, to make sure that they're all in accordance with what we're saying, and with Virginia Department of Transportation and Northern Virginia Parks, National Park Service, some of the other jurisdictions of the local area that do own or maintain some of the facilities that we're talking about. And then getting additional engagement. So we'll probably have another round of kind of outreach where we have our draft plan and we're taking out to people and we ask them specifically, what do you think of it and is it good enough and what might you want to see changed? And so then we will likely at some time this fall have some county board briefings as well, and which we'll get some more feedback. I don't know if that'll be in the form of another work session or if that will be sort of in a smaller group, individual by individual type of arrangement, still to be determined. But then moving into the winter, I see this kind of producing the final draft based upon sort of the feedback we get from that last little bit of outreach. More in the way of this commission leading and the planning commission as well. And we will do an advertisement, hopefully at the December board meeting, and adoption hopefully at the January board meeting. We will see. So just to give you a little more information, we have a lot of what we've been working on, all the drafts and such, posted on our webpage for our bike element working group. You're certainly able to find all that there. And otherwise, you can reach me at my email address here. And so that's my presentation. I'm happy to take questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viola. Mr. Viola has been putting in a lot of hard work lately. The working group has been working him hard. He's drawn more maps than I think I've ever seen in a single project, just in the last month or two. So thank you very much for that. Do commissioners have questions at this time? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Viola, when you were here last, I asked you some questions. Excuse my voice here. I have some allergies. I asked you some questions about the goals of the plan. And looking at the 2008 plan, they've got some specific numbers in there. For example, by 2030, the plan is to achieve a goal of 50% of the population in Arlington using bikes at least occasionally, 20% using frequently, and 10% regularly. How are these terms defined? Because the definition of the terms really leads directly to the kind of projects that are done.
I think we do some surveying of the community from time to time. We household travel survey is the one I think we do the most, and we do ask a lot of questions in that survey that kind of gets to how are you traveling around, and for how often you use this mode, how often do you use that other mode, that sort of thing. And so we do have a kind of a breakdown as to some of those different categories. Regularly, maybe is more than once a week. Occasionally, maybe is about once a month, something like that along those lines. And so taking data from those surveys, which are done every 3 to 4 years, and using that to kind of track how things are changing in terms of utilization in the county.
Okay. All right. I know that's fairly general. Another question I have really concerns capacity utilization. I've mentioned this before, and in a presentation, another one of your prior presentations, I expressed concern about trade-offs, because when you're looking at vehicle movements and bike lanes sharing a road with that is the same space, there's going to be less space available for vehicles, and then therefore slower movements. There's a lot of, when you're looking at this plan, especially on arterials and major and minor arterials, there are a lot of trade-offs involved here, whether it's sharrows or specific lanes or sharrows that really instruct or encourage people to ride bicycles on the side of the road rather than in the center. And that depends upon factors such as the width of the road and other things. What analytical capabilities are you using to determine these trade-offs?
Well, we do have some modeling capabilities which we have used on a number of occasions where we've done kind of significant roadway changes, where we've changed the number of lanes, or where we're looking at intersection changes. There are some transportation models that are used very regularly by agencies such as Arlington County, which we have used to do analysis.
Are you using, PTV Corporation has a program, basically a micro-simulation model called VISIM, V-I-S-S-I-M.
Yes.
And that has the capability of looking when you have one lane and you have, this is the case of sharrows, where you've got vehicles and bicycles sharing that lane. They can actually model the behavior when the lane narrows, for example, what happens to vehicle movements, and it also addresses safety issues because that space between the bicyclist and the vehicle narrows. So they have software that measures that as well as bicycle lanes. And I'm just wondering, They also have a 30-day free demonstration period, and they're rather proud of it. It's used in Europe. Many cities in Europe, Amsterdam, London, and so forth, have used this to determine the feasibility of bicycle lanes. In particular, there's one part of the plan in the bicycle element that can model bicycle movements in a shared lane. Another part of it dealing with vehicle movements, it deals with bike lanes and vehicles where you have a separate lane there within a given road space. So it has the analytical capability of modeling vehicle movements. Because one of the concerns that I have is that when you have bicyclists and cars moving in very close proximity to each other, you have a real safety issue there, and they can address that. Has the county staff used VISTIM? Or I don't know of any equivalent software that can model that.
We have used VISTIM for many years. What you're describing actually sounds like an advanced version of it, but...
Well, there are several versions, but it's a micro-simulation model that can do this. And as far as I know, it's the most advanced one. But it provides an objective basis to evaluate many of these projects, because when I look at the plan here, I don't see any projects identified. I see that, well, we're planning this and planning that. And on your list here,
you haven't gotten that portion of the plan that has projects listed yet, because we haven't really released that part yet. We're still working on that.
okay, well, that's good, because that means that there's a potential for applicability of VISTIM here. There's a 30-day free demonstration trial, I noticed. I did some research on that. Has the county used that? This is the micro-simulation version of it that deals with bicycles and also with mixed traffic.
I don't know if that specific version. I certainly can ask our staff that do work, our TE&O office, or Transportation Engineers and Operations Bureau. They're the folks who do work with that software. I will ask them if they are using it currently, or if this is something they want to investigate, maybe an upgrade or something.
Or something that can...
But we have done modeling on a number of occasions where we've looked at what would it take to, say, include protected bike lanes in Glebe Road and the Ballston area, and we did a lot of modeling on that. So on occasion, when we've got a project that we want to evaluate, we will do a model. So.
All right.
And we do have one speaker for this item.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and do that then.
Mr. Rice?
Unsafe and reckless behavior by bicyclists is worse than ever in Arlington County. Despite dedicated bicycle lanes, for example, on Fairfax Drive in Ballston, bicyclists routinely ignore traffic lights and ride on sidewalks, often at high speed. Helmets are optional, especially among bike share riders. Over the summer, pedestrians have had to avoid group bicycle riders on sidewalks in Westover Village, Ballston, and Shirlington on sidewalks. People who ride bicycles competitively are practicing Saturday and Sunday mornings in residential neighborhoods like Fairlington, zooming through stop signs without slowing down. An increasing number of bicyclists are riding electric bicycles, often at high speeds on sidewalks. Finally, many walkers and hikers on Arlington's trails no longer walk on the trail, but on the grass off the trail because of reckless high-speed racing by bicyclists. It's more than evident that Arlington bicyclists are essentially free-range, and few responsible adults in county government are willing to make any comment whatsoever about reckless and dangerous behavior by bicyclists. Certainly not Mr. Slatt or Mr. Viola. DES Transportation, staff, and county board members who can't say no to any special interest. Speaking of sidewalks, at least 10 miles of brick sidewalks along major streets in Arlington should have been replaced 10 years ago. How much more will be spent on one special interest group whose leaders, promoters, and lobbyists are increasingly fanatics?
So I should mention that the policy statements that we have in the plan do address kind of bicyclist behavior and safety education and enforcement, as well as talking about just engineering facilities. So that is incorporated in what we're planning to put together in the plan. And we do have programs right now that we emphasize on safety, and we will certainly have more in the future, is what we expect.
Commissioner Lantalmi.
I notice you are, of course, working with the National Park Service, VDOT, the other entities that control part of the bike network. Are you talking to them about the type of users that are allowed? For example, my understanding is that the Park Service trails don't allow electric bikes. I mean, people do it, but they're apparently still technically prohibited. Is there some movement to coordinate so that we can have uniform rules as to what qualifies to use the network?
Actually, that's a very good point, because we have some updating of our ordinances to do as well, which we're going to be undertaking in the next few months. But there is a regional kind of effort on that as well, not just Arlington, it's DC and Alexandria and some of the other jurisdictions. And I believe the Park Service is part of that group as well. Because as we have identified, electric bikes are now kind of becoming very commonplace. The electric scooters, other types of vehicles now out there on the streets and trails, and we do need to satisfactorily come up with where they are appropriate to be used and where they are not. And so that is something we will be working on, and in a regional context.
Other commissioner questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. LaViola.
Thank you.
And our next item is item 4, shared mobility devices. This is an action item. Jim Larson is here from DES Transportation. And we have one speaker currently for this.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I was here last month saying we were trying to get ready to launch a proposed demonstration project, hopefully October 1st, depending on what happens at the next board meeting. So we're just going to go through this simply, and I encourage you to stop me if you have any questions. This is a whole new evolution, as you've been hearing, and it relates somewhat to what Rich talked about as well. You know, it's being called a lot of things. We're calling it shared mobility devices because that seems to change daily as to what that actually means. But it's dockless bike share, it's e-scooters, and frankly, right now, as you probably know, without our invitation, because we don't really control that, which is why we're getting this underway, we have e-scooters in a lot of locations. In this case, it's Bird, but also Lime. So for those of you that haven't ridden one, and I haven't, you find them on your app. That's how you know where they're located. One of the things, of course, and this has come up in we have a website called email, mobility@arlingtonva.us. We've probably received only about 14, 15 comments, some pro, some con, so what are you doing about this? But most important, they're not permitted, and I got this question, I think, from one of the commissioners, on sidewalks or trails. That's e-bikes and that's electric scooters. That is one of the things during the demonstration project we're going to be watching very closely. You may remember the the shared. This entire project is modeled on that, based on that success, which some of you will recall. I wasn't here at that time, but we've been pushing that forward. Park anywhere within reason. Well, that's in the mind of the beholder, as you know. So we're holding not only the supplier responsible, but that means not blocking ADA ramps, not a building entrance, not an exit, not a driver or a pedestrian right of way, and the list goes on. If you turn to the next page, I just wanted to give you a reminder of some of the history, and it changes rapidly. In September of 2017, dockless bike share launched in DC Montgomery County. One of the reasons we waited is we wanted to get some of their experience is underway. And as you know, it's been an evolution. It got extended, and I believe today the district adopted some new direction and is also going to be looking in January. Greg, my colleague here, will correct me if I've missed any dates on this, Greg, but thank you. OFO and Mobike are no longer here. You know, we always estimated that there would be a shakedown period, and it's already begun. Just I want to bring that up. March came Scooter Share, and as you know, Bird, actually they did call me a few days before they came, so I knew kind of what to expect. But as you've seen, it's evolved over time. Skip is another one, and Lime. Now I'll drop to the next page, or next slide. So we're proposing a 9-month pilot program, demonstration project. And I'll give you some details that are evolving right now. They're in the county attorney's office and the memorandum of understanding. Initial fleet size per mode per company. We're going in at a recommendation of 200. We started at one of 300 or 400, then we went back to 150. 200 seems to be what our other colleagues have used. However, there will be an opportunity to have performance growth based on metrics that our person monitoring this and I and myself will review. So you could increment it by 50, but you have to demonstrate that your product's being used, that you're just not throwing it all up and down our transit corridors. Set speed limits. Right now, 15 is the number. Most of the jurisdictions seem to be headed that way. We've had a little debate about could it be 12. We're not sure that they have governors on them, but we're not sure that they can just be changed at will. I will tell you, and we'll be watching this as we get underway, there is some technology, and I'm not the technology person, being reviewed that one of the companies might actually be able to change and set it so if they're moving from one border to another that has a different speed limit, the scooter would adjust. That's not here yet, but we're keeping track of that technology as it comes along. 15 being the current goal, I think, in the process. Misparked devices, we're going to allow currently, depending on what comes out from the county attorney tomorrow, we've proposed a 2-hour turnaround that they have to take care of it immediately. And we've also recommended fines for that, as I recall. Yes. Yeah, good. Data sharing. That's probably one of the most important points. We have a whole series of things that they have to share with us because the whole point is to find out what's going on during this time. Where are they going? What's the starting point? What's the ending point? I spoke to 4 of our county board members yesterday in different briefings, and that was something we discussed. And we're actually aligning ourselves with our colleagues in Alexandria. We're sharing information. You know, these are going to go back and forth. We're trying to have consistent application and also trying to have it align in general with the District of Columbia. I think you mentioned that, Chairman, before as a possibility. Permit fee. In the document, we met in August with the potential suppliers. We discussed some of what we were thinking about because if we pass this, we want to get it down and going. We want to be sure that we weren't somehow not participating together. So I believe that the buy-in is going to be for each mode, meaning if it's scooters, $8,000. That money will be put into revenue so that we can fund the person or persons who are going to monitor this on a weekly basis for us in the process, hopefully to break even in that process. Let's see. So, as I said, we're evaluating the pilot during that time. I'm expecting we're going to get a lot of feedback. We've had a lot of comments on it already. Someone asked me how we came up with this process. Well, they're here, and we know they're not going away. So we think this is a responsible thing to ask the county and you all to move forward on.
We seem to have lost your microphone.
Off? Okay, sorry. At the Commonwealth level, you can not ride on the sidewalks. That's in code. What's going to happen, as you know, and I think Rich mentioned it earlier, during this process, we'll probably be going back to the county board and others, and also to look at any ordinance changes that might be required. And I suspect we will be back to you long before that occurs. We'll get underway in October. We'll make periodic reports, whatever you think is appropriate, when we've got better information. Is it another mobility option? A lot of people think it's the first mile, last mile with the scooters. We've incorporated, I'll tell you by way of background, all of our county stakeholder groups inside, Police Department, Parks Authority, Northern Virginia Park Authority, and so forth. And we've also, I don't know if I distributed, but we're also going to be before all of our major groups, giving them updates between now and the county board meeting on the 22nd, including, everybody that we all know besides you all, Economic Development Commission. There are a number of businesses interested in this. BIDs are interested in this. Neighborhood Complete Streets, Commission on Aging, Disability Advisory Commission. So we're trying to cover that. And after the board approves it, there's also going to be a robust outreach to citizens as well. So I guess I already said that. So we're hoping you'll endorse this concept moving forward, and I'd answer any questions I could. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
And we have one speaker on this.
Oh,
Yes, let's go ahead to this.
Mr. Perez.
So bicyclists on sidewalks among pedestrians are bad enough. Who in county government allowed electric scooters into this county? Who? Who allowed them? Was it you? Who? Who on the county board gave the okay for this?
We're not allowed to control that.
Who?
Commonwealth Attorney says we cannot control it.
The behavior of electric scooter riders isn't irrational, it's insane. According to the label on the electric scooters, bird scooters are not to be operated on sidewalks by persons not licensed, by persons not wearing helmets, and by persons under 18. How many of Bird's rules are adhered to? I had to avoid 2 bird scooters on the plaza outside this building on my way to this meeting. Responsible? You are completely irresponsible. Irresponsible. Especially when you consider this was inflicted on Arlington residents with no warning whatsoever. No warning whatsoever. Completely irresponsible. We need a big change on transportation staff. We need a big change on the Transportation Commission. We need a big change in county government. County government is supposed to be responsible for our safety, for our security, for our quality of life. Not every single stinking special interest that comes in here and wants to do its own thing. Do its own thing, and that's what they are doing their own thing, free range beyond anything the bicyclists are doing. You should be ashamed of yourself for allowing this to happen and for encouraging it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jerez. Are there commission questions? Commissioner Wadsworth.
Yeah, question about the data that will be shared with the county. Can you share a little bit more about what kind of data and?
Sure. Hi there. Excuse me. So the data that we're going to be requesting of the SMD operators is going to be similar to what is already requested of Capital Bike Share. It's going to be data on basic stuff on like trip data, number of riders, average trip, average length, stuff like that, but also things in regard to like injuries and complaints, not only number of, but where they're occurring specifically. Parking violations, all these things, to help us evaluate whether these operators are complying with the requirements.
And if they're not complying, we will have the ability to pull them out of the program.
So maybe a couple other things to think about would be, who owns that data once the county takes possession of it? Who owns it once the vendor takes possession of it, takes it from the user? Is there any possibility to delete that data in the future? Can the vendor transfer it to another company? Can the county transfer that to another?
We'll check into that. I know a lot of it is going to be an aggregate because of privacy issues. but
Right.
Yeah.
Those are really the key questions to ask if you're going to start collecting that data. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
So noted.
Commissioner Yeri, did you? All right. Commissioner Clement.
The motivation behind this initiative, but I share Mr. Harris' concerns. As you know, I am a biker. I'm on the streets every day. I've seen these scooters in operation. I believe, honestly, that many scooter riders will attempt to comply with the regulations as outlined tonight, but that's not the issue. The issue is that our street infrastructure, in particular Arlington, cannot support this mode of transportation safely. Yes, the District of Columbia, I don't know, I don't live there. I know that they are potentially very hazardous in the district. This district has a much wider street grid than Arlington. It also happens to have a grid, which we don't. There are a lot of reasons why this type of vehicle might be acceptable in another metropolitan area, but not here. In particular, none of the streets that were listed in Mr. Viola's presentation tonight are safe for scooters. That includes the Pike, Glebe Road, George Mason, Wilson, Washington Boulevard. So what we have a situation is we're telling these people they can't go on the sidewalks for safety reasons, namely the safety of the pedestrians. So that puts these guys at risk on virtually all of Arlington's arterials. And so even though I agree with the motivation, or at least I don't question the motivation of Arlington officials in this regard, I simply believe that it is irresponsible to put the scooter riders and pedestrians in an unsafe situation. I think that amounts to some form of irresponsibility. Over.
Commissioner Yeri.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Larson, for the presentation and for coming up with this plan on very short turnaround. I think I first heard it was being worked on 2-ish months ago, so congratulations. I think I just have a couple questions about this. How was that final cap of 350 devices per mode arrived at?
Well, we looked at some of the other jurisdictions that didn't have any controls, their problems, like in the district. Montgomery County, we looked at their count. We felt this was a small community and that we did not want to unleash a huge number. There's probably already, we don't know for sure, but there's probably already at least 250 to 300 Bird and Lime scooters out there with no controls. And I guess I should mention that as of the permit date start, they're gone. They either pay the $8,000 and come under our monitoring, or they can no longer be here at that point. That doesn't exactly answer your question, but
I think I asked because I find it interesting which mobility devices we do and do not put caps on. As a pedestrian, I am much more terrified of the 85-ish thousand, I'm just guessing, cars that are probably within the county.
Right.
So I think that's just my little moment of discord.
As an aside, I might say that I think the scooters will be the thing we're watching right now closely. E-bikes are coming, but for us right now, that doesn't seem to be impending in our situation. And dockless, if you've noticed, they were around for a lot, and now suddenly I'm not seeing that many. So that's why we're trying to watch this e-scooter very closely.
Thank you. I have another question then too. So this pilot will be running. Are there any kinds of tests or other demonstrations within the pilot with regards to parking or any other kind of collections that the county will be running? Like thinking about how they might convert some on-street car parking spaces into either mobility device or bicycle parking, things of that nature?
We've had the discussion. I wouldn't say we've come up with a conclusion on that. There are some other, we've studied some other areas, or some areas, and I'm not suggesting this, by the way, but that have actually come up with locations, particularly in like the corridor, where they're actually painting locations where they can park.
Interesting. And then one more question about the data. Would that data end up being publicly available, like through something like the county's data portal at any point?
Yes, excuse me. Yes, I believe the data, it will be anonymized and it will be available to the public for the development of apps or to break down the data to see anything that could be, any conclusions that can be drawn.
Great, thank you. Actually, I had one more, sorry, I lied. So this pilot can be extended as needed at the county's discretion. Is there any flexibility within the MOU? Like, let's say we reach the end of the pilot, the county decides to extend it, and then one of the providers within shows a demonstrated need for being able to lift the cap from 350 to something like 400 or 450. Is there flexibility within this document that would provide for that?
No, not currently. We're definitely intending to end it at the end of the 9 months, but we'll be looking at it before that. So in case issues like you're bringing up, we'll have to come back to the board on that if that happens, or the manager.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a small correction. I believe you said 350 for the cap. Just wanted to make clear for everyone here, the cap would be 200 per device and would grow. If these companies can demonstrate a need for growth, they can grow by up to 50 per month. Just want to make that clear.
Right, yeah, because I see up 50 per month, up to 350 per mode per company. So that's where I got that from. So page 3.2. So.
The idea is that, and we got this from some other experiences, is that if you got all these out there and they're being used once a day, we don't want another 50 on the, but if you can demonstrate specifically that they're getting 3 uses a day or 4 uses a day, then we could at least review it. We still have the right to reject it.
Right, I think that's why I asked, because just concerns based on what I've read from other jurisdictions that kind of, not saying this will happen in Arlington, but they kind of extend the pilot indefinitely on and on and on without giving companies any opportunity to grow, even though they've shown that there is like a need for that demand, or there is demand to support the growth. So that's why I was asking about that.
Commissioner Price?
Mr. Larson, thank you for your presentation. I'm completely and utterly supportive of the Shared Mobility Devices Demonstration Project. I think it's wonderful. I just have a clarification. When Mr. Jerez, you had that sort of that exchange, you had mentioned, I thought you said that there was no way of preventing, they're here, right? So there was no way of preventing them from coming into the county. At least that's what the county attorney had told you. But you're saying once they're in this program, if they don't adhere to certain regs, you're going to kick them out of the county? How does that?
They've actually already been told in our meeting that if you're already here as of whatever it is, October 1st, or when our demonstration project begins, you must be in the program or you will not be permitted in the county. County attorney is reviewing that.
Okay, because I can tell you, they're even in my neighborhood, and I live in a transit desert. So if they can come up the hills in my neighborhood, then you should have them all over the county. Thank you.
Commissioner Calkins?
Hi, I do apologize. I missed a decent amount of the presentation. I have a number of questions about the interoperability with the district. They are doing the second phase of their pilot, which is very different than their first. What type of conversations have you had with interoperability with the district? As we've learned from Car2Go, from Lyft, from Uber, these mobility services cross those jurisdictional boundaries. And how do our caps play into DDOT's caps? And have you guys had conversations about how things are going to be counted, just so that, you know, Arlingtons as well as district residents have the ability to use these mobility services?
So we have been in frequent communication with DDOT and as well as other jurisdictions in the area. So the devices will be allowed to cross borders, of course, but DDOT is sort of setting, they're sort of the big player in the region, so they're sort of setting the rules as it goes. We're trying to get on the same page with them as far as at least as identical as possible with our requirements, with our permit requirements. Yeah, excuse me, at the end of the day, well, actually, yeah, we're trying our best to get on the same page with them.
One of the things we are doing, as you know, we're longtime participants, Capital Bike Share. So that regional coalition group also has this as a subject. And lately it's been our agenda all the time. And I find that we're getting better sharing of information than before. It may not be exactly where we want it, but we're headed in, I think, the right direction.
And then I do have a second question. Exciting things happened today. We have electric Capital Bike Shares in the fleet. I saw multiple people using them today. Saw them when I didn't need to use them, which made me sad. How are we going to, and I know that the dockless bike shares have really fallen off in the district, except for Jump. Jump is still in the game. They're the player. They're the reason why DDOT amended the policies to have a bike lock to part of their new standard and aren't getting pushback because, Jump's already got those and they're the player. One of my concerns is that Arlington has made significant investments financially into Capital Bike Share and making that viable. And that has an onus on serving the community and serving the community well. I want to make sure that as we're allowing these private entities to come into Arlington, that there are ways and mechanisms that we're making sure that Capital Bike Share, continues to expand, that we're very supportive of the electric program, but also that these complement and don't pull, core Capital Bike Share riders from the program.
Well, we agree completely with what you just said. In fact, we're monitoring it very closely. Most recent numbers were?
Yeah, so most recent numbers, we have seen a bit of an effect on Capital Bike Share ridership over the past year. Correlation is not causation, of course, but we've only had a 1% increase in ridership in Arlington this year, whereas in years past, it's always been double digits. So there is a bit of an effect, but we anticipate that there may be some drop off as players leave and as the bicycles leave the region. But we are monitoring very carefully to make sure that we are not undermining the Capital Bike Share program.
As you know, coming up is we have the new stations which will be going in at Roosevelt, Gravelly. They're not all there yet. And already I think Roosevelt, even though it only has like a week of operation, is like tenfold increase from where we had another station and moved it. So we are encouraged by that. Thanks.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Now, this really just affects the commercial operators of multiple scooters. This does not affect me if I went out and bought an electric scooter. So as long as if I own my own scooter or somebody owns their own scooter, as long as they're not riding on the sidewalks, they can go anywhere.
That's correct.
That is not part of this at all. Okay,
No.
good. Another thing I do note is that Lime apparently has removed all of its bikes, that they are now just going to be scooters. So, in the district, yeah. So, it's definitely moving in that direction away from the bikes and to the scooters. I see them go by. I'm on Key Boulevard, which is a bike way, and they go by constantly now. They're definitely taking over from the bikes. I very rarely see now a non-bike share rental bike along Key Boulevard. So I think this is the right way. I think what you raise is very good, that they go everywhere, much more so than the bikes did. And I think that's very encouraging. Last mile this might actually be the solution to last mile. So I'm very happy that we have this program. I think it should be followed. We need the data. We definitely need data on, are there going to be accidents any different than bicycles? I agree, I'm definitely more afraid of getting hit by a car than I am by a scooter. But our streets are supposed to be shared. They're not supposed to be privileged for cars only. That's the philosophy of dense urban areas, which we are now. So, share is the way to go. And I think the data will be I'm very much looking forward to the data that we get out of this. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, one other question I want to follow up on the issue, the prior comment. Basically, I understand that in the district, that the Lime, they've stopped, as just mentioned, I think, stopped using bikes. One of the problems I understand in the district with Lime and another provider was that bicycles were left randomly, since they don't have to be returned to a specific location, unlike Capital Bike Share. And that was a problem. I know the district, I think they limited the number of companies. Now, I'm not sure, that's incorrect, okay.
The number of bikes per company.
Per company, okay. Was there a problem in the district in these bikes? Because that's what I was familiar with, was the bicycles that were left at random locations. And so the city had, in this case, the district had to collect them and then I guess return them to the company. I'm not sure what. Do you anticipate a problem like that?
Well, I guess anything could happen, but I'm not thinking the dockless bikes are going to be a problem for us. Prior to this, when they've appeared, we actually have a person that's helped us. We actually call the company now and ask them to remove the bike. But so I know at a couple Capital Bike Share stations, I'm sure you've seen them, you'll see a dockless bike parked next to them, right? So we've been watching that too. We have some ideas. It's too premature for me to just say for sure, but there could be some longer term things that we could do with dockless and e-bikes that might help us embrace and complement Capital Bike Share. Rather than taking away, I think it's actually hopefully going to help us, not be a negative.
Commissioner Brose.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question about the requirement to hold the scooters to a limit of 10 miles an hour. Is that like a mechanical thing, or how are you going to, is that an...
They have a governor on it.
Okay,
It can
yeah,
actually
so
be
this
set.
is not a matter of the police making sure they're not going above
No.
10 miles an hour, things like that. Okay, just question. I just responding to Commissioner Clements and our speaker's concern about, the wildness on the streets. It's not exactly that they're speeding, actually, right? Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Hester.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Larson, and I'm supportive of this project. I think you mentioned at the start of it that you haven't tried one of the scooter programs before. I encourage you and my fellow commissioners to download the app and try a free ride.
I have been providing interviews, though, of everybody on the street so I can get feedback.
It's quite interesting. I did try Bird once before. I think you're going to run into, I hypothesize, two pain points I think have been mentioned by all the commissioners here. The first is on parking, and the second is on safety. Around safety is people not wearing helmets, not utilizing the proper bike lane. But the app, some of these apps clearly state that you're supposed to wear a helmet, that you're supposed to be in a bike lane, but people don't seem to abide by that. I think you're going to run into that when you do the study.
We're going to push them on that subject. Bird, for example, when you go in, you probably know this, you can, they urge you to buy a helmet. I don't think it's happening much for whatever the amount is, but then they give you a coupon that gets you that money back if you do it. I admit I haven't seen many helmets either.
Right. And the first piece on parking, I think you mentioned this also. I don't know if it was missed. You mentioned that some of these dockless bikes had gone away and that the business case hadn't closed for them. I think we're going to notice that a lot of these scooter or other shared mobility systems are going to not have the business case closed for them. I think a lot of venture capital money is being thrown at them right now as cities seem to push back on, again, some of their business cases that you can pick it up anywhere, you can drop it off anywhere. As cities and counties push back on that, they're going to have to find other ways to close that business case, whether it be partnering with private businesses, which may be able to set up a charging station. They'll get some sort of fee off of that and foot traffic. But I think we can, as a county, influence what that business case is ultimately going to look like, and it's still close and provide that first mile, last mile mobility.
Makes a lot of sense. We actually, to remain nameless, I already had call from 2 business development operations in Crystal City about that very subject of some kind of partnership. We didn't move on it yet, but we're keeping track of it.
Looking forward to results. Thank you.
Commissioner Wadsworth.
That's a really good point. That's why I was making the point about, what happens with this data, because the data is where the company can actually make a lot more money if they set up their business model right than the vehicle and the fees they charge themselves. So we really have to get a understanding quickly on how that data is being used and what becomes of it.
We agree with you. That's why they're doing this, right? So
Right.
they could sell that data.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And then just one more quick comment. Good idea. We have to promote innovation. There's a reason these are in the county. They're a legal product. You can bring them in. You can use them. If we want to regulate to death every new technology that ever comes out, we'd be riding horses and donkeys. So we've got to be open to new ideas and try new things. So this is a good idea. Thank you.
Mr. Larson, in your meeting with some of the companies where you talked about some of these potential regulations, what did you hear back from the companies about the proposed speed limit? Is that something that they can accommodate or something they find problematic?
Well, the federal regulation, I think, says 20. No one's at 20. One's at 18, and they're not part of the group coming in. Everyone else was at 15. So that's kind of where we stayed. I'm encouraged. This is anecdotal, but a couple of our county board members have told me that they didn't know if they could get up the hill in Roslyn at 10 miles an hour. They thought they'd need 15. But I think that was a semi-joke, but they looked at me and said I looked heavy and I would need a 15. But, part of the problem is when these people pass you on the sidewalk, I can see that it's scary to some people. And we're going to look at this a little further. I want to have, I think we're going to try to have the administrative wording that we could change that if we found that there was a problem, move it lower.
Yeah, my concern.
What do you think about that?
Concern is that it differs from the federal e-bike regulations, that we have classifications of e-bike in the federal government, class 1 and class 2 and blah, 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 blah. And all of, most of them largely sit at 20 miles per hour, and yet we're coming in with a different number. And that's, when that whole, we need to regulate to protect people, but we also need to not stifle innovation. I feel like usually where we want to fall is in getting our regulations to be consistent. So I'm nervous that we are coming in with a number that is different from what is out there in other regulation, and without some specific backing. 15 feels like a number we picked out of the air, or a number that we picked because that's what the current companies have shown up.
Well, the district and Alexandria, I believe, are both at 15.
Okay, so they've both also set speed limits.
15, and also we looked at Seattle. I believe they're at 15. Granted, that's Seattle. We'll do a little bit more looking into this right away. I hear you.
Great, I like to hear that. Commissioner Culkins?
So it's 10, right, is what we're putting in?
We're going to put 15.
We are, okay, good, because that actually really concerned me, because Capital Bike Share's current e-bikes are at 18. I can ride my bike faster than 10. I can ride my bike faster than 15. I've had people pass me on my road bike on a bike share downhill because they were going faster. So I think creating an artificial barrier of speed because of perceived safety is something that I'm very concerned about, because we do want these mobility programs to be successful and to be viable for people to not drive. And I also wanted to make a comment. Safety is very important, and I want to caveat my comment on the fact that Vision Zero, if Arlington joins, which please let us do that, is amazing, but the true impediment to Vision Zero isn't a scooter rider not wearing a helmet. It's not someone going a little bit faster than makes people comfortable on the sidewalk. And I think the more we dilute our conversations into perceived safety issues with either e-bikes or scooters, I think we just really need to coalesce our conversations about the true safety issues in not just Arlington, not just the region, but nationally, are cars. And the fact that they are huge, they're big. I loved your point that we don't regulate cars. I actually think the more comparable point is we don't regulate the numbers of Ubers and Lyfts on our street. And if we're not doing that, why are we regulating the numbers of bikes? Not that I don't think we need to have a good, example period where we come up with policy, but we don't regulate the numbers of Uber and Lyfts, which are safety issues in our streets, comparatively at a level that Lyfts, I did not sleep much last night, that scooters and e-bikes will not compare to, and we're putting significant more regulation on the amount of numbers they have and the data they're sharing with us compared to what we do with Uber and Lyft. And I think that is a little bit of a call to action maybe for the Transportation Commission.
Well, as you probably know, the state didn't allow us to do some of those things with curbside management, which is a problem in Arlington today, but I won't go on that now, but we'll be glad to help you behind the scenes because we're as concerned about that as you are.
Thank you. It does set up my last comment here, which is I support the 200 vehicle and per mode initial cap. I support requiring them to show that the vehicles are being used before increasing it. I am very nervous about the hard cap at the very top. We have a number of companies that want to come in right now, but as you've said, the shakeup has already started. And my concern is if one of these comes out dominant, right? If one of them comes out as the scooter provider, we end up with the scooter provider capped at 350 when we were expecting to have 4 scooter providers, who could ultimately have 800 or 1,000 vehicles on the road. So personally, I feel like if we are making them show that these vehicles are used and we are reserving the right to say no when they come in and say we would like 50 more vehicles, here is us showing how they are used, why administratively are we handicapping ourselves with a hard limit on how high they can go when we are already giving ourselves the chance to say no and the chance to require them to show that those vehicles are being used? I mean, I know that this is a new thing and new things freak people out. I mean, when Capital Bike Share came in, I heard very similar things walk through this door at Capital Bike Share about how nobody wore a helmet on Capital Bike Share and people were going to die on Capital Bike Share and it was going to be pandemonium on Capital Bike Share. And what we have discovered over the course of the last however many years is it's one of the safest ways you can get around it. Across all of bike share in the entirety of North America, I believe we've had 1 fatality ever on a bike share bike. So I think we need to listen and we need to be careful about our policy, but we also need to let this work itself out and let it fly and see what it can do. Because I'll tell you what, I am not at all surprised that Capital Bike Share ridership is not growing like it was. Half of my Capital Bike Share trips have been replaced by Bird trips in the last 3 months, and I'm sure I'm not alone. Like when I get ready to go down 6, 8, 12 blocks down Columbia Pike to a restaurant, and I look at the Bird app, and there's one a block away, and the closest Capital Bike Share station is 3 blocks away, I get on the Bird. Like, it's not rocket science. And it's great. So I am concerned about the ultimate vehicle cap. I think other than that, I think I can come around on the speed limit. Pricing actually, I looked, seems in line with the Car2Go pilot based on my math. We charged Car2Go about $8,000 a year for administrative overhead also, so that seems reasonable. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
I just want to build on what you have just said about helmets, because experience in Europe, cities such as Amsterdam, Copenhagen, which are dominant, bicycles are the dominant way of getting around in those cities, no one wears helmets. And there is an extremely low injury rate, even though people do not wear helmets. There is safety in numbers. The more people ride bikes, the fewer incidents there are, because all the other users of the streets are used to it, and people are used to it. Helmets are not necessary. In fact, state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia does not require adults to wear helmets. There is no law that requires adults to wear helmets in the Commonwealth. So it is the helmet issue is a red herring.
Mr. Best, am I correct in remembering that this is an action item?
That's correct.
And it's going before the board in this month? In theory? All right. Anybody else have any other questions or comments about the program as proposed? Pilot. I would move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board authorize the county manager to conduct and evaluate a shared mobility devices demonstration project as outlined in our draft board report, with the proviso that they lift the hard cap of 350 vehicles per mode in this draft recommendation.
I'll second that.
That's seconded. Is there any discussion of that motion? All right, all those in favor of the motion? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10. All those opposed? 1, 10 to 1. Commissioner Clement, would you like to speak to why you opposed the motion so I can include it in the letter?
Well, is this an amendment to the main motion or the main motion?
It is the main motion.
Yeah, well, I stated my objections originally. That I have safety concerns because I do not believe that Arlington has a street infrastructure that will safely support such a mode.
Thank you. It was a long time ago in the number of questions that we had about this pilot, so I appreciate you restating. Thank you very much, Mr. Larson.
And our next item is item 5. This is the Virginia Hospital Center Site Plan Amendment. This is an action item.
The commission will take a 5-minute break while staff gets set up for this next item. Thank you.
Thank you.
These are copies of our presentation.
I'll pass this out.
Thank you.
I'm like, are you getting taller?
He does look taller, you're right. It is the hindsight on it. Shaving that beard, is he? Wicked generous.
I sit there. Where do you sit?
Yes, lots of paper. Oh, no, more paper. Oh, more paper. What is this? That's what I was reading.
All right, Mr. Best, we're ready to get back into it.
Our next item is item number 5, the Virginia Hospital Center Site Plan Amendment. This is an action item. There is one additional handout from the applicant that is in front of you. I'll turn it over to the applicant for their presentation.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Adrian Stanton, Vice President at Virginia Hospital Center. Thank you for the opportunity to present our project. I'm going to start with a brief intro, and then I'll turn it over for the specifics of our plan. I want to caution all of us that we not look at this project as just another building. This is a discussion providing and meeting the critical healthcare needs of the county today and in the future. There were once 3 hospitals in Arlington. Today, Virginia Hospital Center is the only hospital serving the county. We have received national recognition for healthcare excellence, and we brought that excellence and the collaborative efforts with the likes of Mayo Clinic to this community. We are the community's healthcare lifeline, and that's evident per the 75% of Arlingtonians who needed inpatient care last year and chose VHC. And with the Arlington's population expected to increase by 39% over the next 15 years, it is imperative for us to continue to meet our community's evolving healthcare needs. Since our last expansion, we have seen a dramatic increase in inpatient admissions, outpatient procedures, behavioral health services, and emergency department visits. Our proposed expansion directly addresses these critical needs. A new pavilion will co-locate outpatient services so they are easily accessible for our patients, and most importantly, open space to expand critically needed inpatient space for our cardiac, stroke, cancer, mental health, and emergency services. We have looked at many different solutions to the need to expand, and what we have put forth is the best plan for our patients. We believe it's the best plan to facilitate the future needs of those we serve and ensures that we do this in an efficient and well-thought-out manner. It will enable VHC to continue to be the region's value provider. By this, I mean we continue to be the hospital that is recognized with the highest patient satisfaction, the highest quality, and at the lowest cost. It is imperative that the hospital continues to grow. Without this, we lose the ability to meet the healthcare needs of the county, and it makes the hospital a target for takeover. Should this occur, we lose considerable local control over what health services are provided to our community. We're the only independent hospital in the region. It is our board's goal, and we are fighting to be able to stay autonomous and to remain in Arlington. For 75 years, Virginia Hospital Center's mission has been to act in the best interest of each patient. We believe this project continues our mission to do what is right for our patients. We are honored and proud to have served our community with nationally recognized care for the past 75 years. We need this expansion to enable us to continue for the next 75. Thank you.
Nicholas Cummings with Walsh Colucci, the land use lawyers, obviously, on this application. Thank you, Mr. Stanton, for your overview of the hospital and its role in our community. As you all know, this application has gone through vigorous public review. We had 6 SPRC meetings, 3 focused on transportation issues. This commission had a lot of feedback at its last meeting where this was presented as an information item. All of this feedback has resulted in many changes, which Wells & Associates is going to review in detail, but I want to summarize the most significant changes that have been in response to that feedback. On George Mason, there was a reduction in access points, improvements to the streetscape, including a wider pedestrian refuge at 19th Street. We have a relocation of 2 bus stops, installation of the 10-foot shared use path, addition of crosswalks both on George Mason and internal to campus. And we are ready to install the rapid flashing beacon if warranted for pedestrian safety. We are also installing and maintaining a Capital Bike Share station, which was a major development in the last couple months. On 19th Street, there will be modifications to the streetscape, including widened streets and a new crosswalk while maintaining parking on both sides. On North Edison, a reduction in access points, modified streetscape matching 19th Street, and a new crosswalk. A new sidewalk extending further, improving pedestrian circulation. And the road will be widened along a proposed garage to maintain the parking lane. Very importantly, there were significant design changes to the garage. This has been a topic that was raised at SPRC with this commission and in meetings with the county over the summer during the deferral period. The garage has been reduced to 6 levels above grade with height tapering back at the 4th and 6th levels and now has 3 levels below grade. Setbacks have increased. There is a significant landscape buffer on the site, and architectural treatment has been continuously worked on in partnership with both the county and in response to comments at SPRC. The total height of the garage was reduced from 95 feet to 67 feet. This resulted in a reduction of 347 parking spaces from the original proposal down to 1,740 spaces in the garage. That is a significant reduction even from the number of parking spaces presented at SPRC in the spring. It's also well below, obviously, zoning ordinance standards and industry standards. It is a significant parking reduction. For pedestrian connectivity, we are committing to providing an east-west pedestrian connection and a north-south pedestrian connection through the garage. In closing, there were significant issues raised at the previous meeting with this commission regarding employee parking costs. As you recall from that meeting, there are important competitive reasons that Virginia Hospital Center does not charge its employees to park in the garage. Its hospital competitors do not charge. They need to attract the best in the business to compete and provide excellent medical care to the community. But also providing parking in the garage at no charge limits the spillover effect into the surrounding neighborhood, which is an important impact that we want to mitigate on the neighbors. However, understanding this commission's concerns and other concerns heard at SPRC regarding charging for parking, Virginia Hospital Center has worked closely with staff to develop a modernized TDM plan that will in part provide an equivalent value in subsidies to employees who do not drive alone. We also have a full-time professional TDM coordinator who will aid in the education of Virginia Hospital Center employees and aid in implementation of this TDM program, which you're going to hear about in detail, that has one of its goals is reducing those trips. Finally, before I turn this over, Virginia Hospital Center has also made a serious commitment to cyclists. The bike parking facilities will be modernized, brought up to standards, facilities available for showering and changing. And as said earlier in this presentation, Virginia Hospital Center is going to pay to install and maintain the bike share station, and we'll have the 10-foot shared use path on George Mason Drive, which is a really important addition to the facility on that street. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wells and Associates, who's going to go through all of this in great detail for you.
Hello, good evening. I'm Mike Pinkowski with Wells and Associates, and I'm going to walk through the details. I'll try not to be too redundant here. The site, everybody's, I'm sure, aware, is north of I-66. It's about 1 mile northwest of the Ballston Metro. The road surrounding the site, on the west side, we have George Mason Drive. It has a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, and it's classified as a minor arterial. To the south is 16th Street. It's 25 miles an hour speed limit, and it's a major collector. To the north is 19th Street, and to the east is Edison. Those are both local streets with 25-mile-an-hour speed limits. Surrounding, we have 3 neighborhoods in the area: John M. Langston, Tara Lee Way Heights, and Waycroft Woodlawn. So what we have in front of us here is the proposed density summary, the existing, and as well as the proposed conditions. The construction of the new outpatient building will allow for the relocation of approximately 120,000 square feet of outpatient services currently within the hospital, and this will allow for the hospital to add 101 new patient beds and expand some existing services, including an expanded emergency department, expanded inpatient imaging, expanded mental health services, as well as lab and support services. This is a summary of the existing access points to the hospital and the existing Edison site. I'm going to start at 19th and kind of go counterclockwise. You can see there's one driveway currently on 19th Street that serves the Edison site, 2 driveways on Edison Street, one right at the 19th Street intersection, one that's kind of on the boundary of the 2 properties. Then getting onto the existing VHC campus. This is a restricted access point for staff and doctors, as well as there are some services back here. The oxygen and medical waste is back there as well. Going to the next one, this entrance is for ambulances and staff only. And then coming back around to George Mason, this is the existing signalized intersection, which serves patient, visitors, and staff. And then coming back to 17th Street, we have, this is a full access unsignalized intersection. Loading, this is the main loading access point. Emergency vehicles also use this access, as well as patients, visitors, and staff. And then just north of that is the final existing driveway on the Edison site. So in total on the VHC property today, there's a total of 2,106 parking spaces. 1,872 of those are structured in 3 garages, and there's a total of 234 surface parking spaces. Approximately 70% of the existing structured parking on site is dedicated to patients and visitors. VHC currently also leases 550 off-site parking spaces, 2 garages in Ballston, Mount Olivet Church at 16th and George Mason, or Glebe Road, excuse me, their Carlin Springs site, and next door at the Edison site. They currently run 3 shuttle buses to Ballston between 5 and 9 a.m. and 2 and 10 p.m., and 1 to the Carlin Springs site between 5:30 and 8 p.m., 5:30 a.m. and 8 p.m. Based on ridership, the further away sites, the ones in Ballston, Carlin Springs, it seems that based on the ridership logs that we've gotten from the hospital, that those sites are fairly underutilized, mainly due to the distance and the extra time that it takes for the employees to get to and from work. As part of what we've done also, we analyzed about 300 days worth of garage data and utilization in the demand study for the existing 1,872 spaces. Based on that data, the garages themselves reach a practical capacity of 90% or greater between the hours of 9:30 a.m. till about 3:30 p.m. So most of the day, the garage is at capacity. And if anybody has been there before, I'm sure you've probably had trouble finding parking within one of the garages. The peak demand was identified slightly over the existing supply of 1,900 spaces, and that's mainly due to valet and double parking within the garages, and that equates to a 246 space deficiency within the existing facilities. So this is a rendering of the August 6th 4.1 submission. Last time we were here, I believe the submission was the December 1st submission. Between the August submission, there was a subsequent submission made in June 1st. The plan that's in front of you here is a plan that has evolved based on feedback from both SPRC and staff. And modifications have been made that focus on the consolidation of access, safety, and pedestrian connectivity. Just alone from the December submission, we've consolidated 2 additional access points, one along Edison Street between the existing green garage and the proposed garage. The service drive at one point connected out to Edison Street, as well as the existing driveway at the 17th Street intersection on George Mason. So now I'm going to walk through each of the roadways surrounding the site and some of the specific improvements that Nick had mentioned. Starting at the north on George Mason, that's page left. New sidewalk across 19th Street. As you approach the 19th Street intersection, or from 19th Street, there's a new pedestrian crossing proposed there. A wider pedestrian refuge on George Mason. Today, there's a very short pedestrian refuge. It's about 4 feet, so you can feel like you're hung out there in the middle of traffic. This median here is approximately 8 to 10 feet wide. And also, as mentioned, there's a potential for rapid flash and beacon at this intersection. That's going to be based on if the warrants are met, because as we move down the street at the outpatient pavilion entrance, we plan on providing full pedestrian infrastructure and signalized crosswalks to get east and west across George Mason Drive. Along the entire site frontage, Last time we were here was an 8-foot shared use path. We've increased that to a 10-foot shared use path. New signalized access point at the outpatient pavilion and garage, including the pedestrian access, as I mentioned. The closure of the C driveway to consolidate the access points to 2 rather than 3. And we've maintained the median break for the 17th Street cul-de-sac. We've also relocated both of the bus shelters. The one proximate to the 19th George Mason intersection was really just relocated back further into the property to allow for the 10-foot clear path, while the one at the existing signalized intersection to the south has been moved on to the north side of the intersection, on the far side of the intersection. If anybody's come to the hospital approaching from the south, if the bus stops there, it kind of blocks that shoulder lane, and you'll have spill back almost all the way to 16th Street. But moving it to the far side of the intersection, it removes that conflict. So here's some of the details about the proposed access point and some of the benefits that we believe that it provides. Number one, it provides patients and visitors with simple direct access into and out of the outpatient pavilion. And it consolidates the access points, as I mentioned, as requested by staff and the SPRC committee. It minimizes internal vehicular conflicts while improving pedestrian connectivity and safety internal to the site. It maximizes traffic signal spacing. The signal that is proposed to the existing signal at the hospital and the one to the south at 16th Street are fairly equally spaced at approximately 550 feet. It maximizes the outbound vehicle stacking storage area. It allows for people coming out of the garage to queue directly back without any conflicts of any other internal loop roads. It sets the stage for the future ring road. It reduces potential inbound queuing and spillback onto the public streets that if you've been to the hospital, especially at the existing signal, as soon as you come in, there's that decision point. I was just there the other day. You get a cab. He doesn't know which way to go. It takes one vehicle and it starts to spill back onto George Mason. All this, we've analyzed this as well as 3 other options. From a technical perspective, this works operationally with acceptable levels of service and manageable queues without spillback to adjacent intersections or even to the Tara Lee townhomes just north of the proposed signal. Moving on to 19th Street, I pointed out already the new crosswalk across 19th Street at Edison. We're also proposing one at the at George Mason as well as at Edison. There's a new landscape strip, 4 feet with a 6-foot sidewalk. We've widened the street into our site to maintain parking on both sides, as well as 11-foot travel lanes. Last time we were here, we were considering removing the parking on the south side so that we can remove the yield street, but we've widened into our property so that we can maintain the parking on the south side. Additionally, we've provided curb extensions at George Mason at the site driveway as well as Edison, which shortens the crossing distance for the pedestrians crossing 19th Street. Moving on to Edison, again, we've consolidated curb cuts. We're down to 2 from 3 and 4 that exist today. There's new crosswalks proposed at 17th Street as well as across the site driveway. There'll be a new sidewalk on the east side of North Edison Street between 19th and 17th Street. There's approximately 775 feet of new sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. In order to maintain parking, we are also widening into our property along the outpatient garage so that parking can be maintained on the south side of the street. There will be a slight loss of parking adjacent to the new service road, loop road that serves adjacent to the green garage as well as the power plant, just so that we can maintain the existing mature screening that is there today. So in summary, this is the proposed access scheme. Along George Mason, you'll have 2 full movement signalized intersections. Those will serve patients, visitors, and truck traffic, as well as some staff. Those are highlighted. Those paths are highlighted in yellow. The public paths internal to the site. Moving around to Edison Street, this will be an employee-only entrance with direct access into and out of the garage. Coming around to Edison Street, both of these driveways will be maintained as limited access driveways, serving employees and the services and ambulances that I mentioned earlier. You can see on the right-hand side there, we have, this question came up earlier, how are ambulances approaching the site? And what we have here is a weekly summary that the hospital has provided. 65% of the ambulance traffic today is approaching the site from George Mason. So all deliveries today and in the future go to the main central loading dock in the rear of the hospital. In the future, they'll have access from both of the existing and proposed signal. Truck traffic, tractor trailer traffic will use the new signal and be able to circulate through the site from that signal. Coming in from the southern intersection, it's just too tight of turns through. One would be a hairpin and a 180-degree turn. So we made sure that the truck traffic can be facilitated from the outpatient signal. Like I had mentioned, all loading activities would come to the main loading facility, and then you can see highlighted in orange next to the proposed parking. That's a 30 by 30 driveway, if you will, and all the deliveries that are destined for the outpatient pavilion would be brought over in a van-sized vehicle. So we wouldn't even have any box trucks over there. I'll get into another slide that shows a pedestrian connection. There should be no worry of the vehicle spilling back into the pedestrian realm. So to address the needs of the proposal and to address the existing deficiency I mentioned, along with a modernized TDM plan, a new 1,740 space parking garage is proposed. This results in a net increase of 1,666 spaces on site. There's a loss of 74 surface spaces today, mainly in front of the existing medical office building and behind the green garage to provide the service drive and new loop road, as well as along the parallel service route in George Mason so we can convert that to two-way traffic. When we compare this to the December 4.1, it's a resulting loss of 347 spaces. It's also, there have been major changes to the garage itself. It's a reduction of 562 above grade spaces, or 36% reduction in above grade parking. So this slide here shows a comparative analysis that we completed of the zoning ordinance requirement at 3,902 spaces, and what the ITE trip generation, parking generation, would say that the site should serve. We looked at ULI as well as industry standard, and you can see that the proposed parking supply is below all four of these. Some special features within the new garage. There'll be a separate vertical ramp system for patients and visitors, as well as the employees and physicians, so that there's no mix of parking to make it easier for the visitor. Employee parking areas will include bi-level space indicators so that they know if there's space available on level 4 or 6 or down at level P2. Patients and visitor parking areas will include individual spaces, which will make it even better for them so that they don't have to search around for a space. They'll know exactly where there is available spaces. There'll be painted interior parking areas. It'll be open with natural light and ventilation. There'll be an enclosed elevated walkway that'll get employees, visitors, and patients from the outpatient pavilion to the existing campus. And then there's a special traffic topping that'll be on the floors of the patient visitor. It provides texture and long-term maintenance of the structure. So this slide summarizes the existing and proposed exterior pedestrian connections. The blue hatching summarizes the on-site sidewalks, and the green are within the the right-of-way. I want to point out two in particular. We have the east-west connection just north of the MOB and existing green garage that provides the east-west through connection. And then as part of the SBRC process, we heard that 19th Street block was way too long. So there's a new pedestrian connection proposed from the driveway of 19th that'll provide a connection north-south through that structure to get you to the main campus. These are some shots of each of them. This is the east-west pedestrian connection. If you were standing at the new service drive looking east, so what you're seeing in front of you, or what's right in front of the sidewalk is the proposed garage. To your right would be the existing medical office building. This is the access point on 19th Street for the proposed north-south pedestrian connection. You can see there's a through passage just to the east of the garage driveway. So in blue here are the existing bicycle facilities on site. We acknowledge the fact, and it's been brought up at this commission and by others, that the existing facilities are substandard based on Arlington current standards. We acknowledge that. We're committed to upgrade those facilities. In red is where the new proposed Class 1 bike facility is, as well as in front of the outpatient pavilion where some Class 3 racks will be located. So in total, what staff is looking for and what we're committing to is a total of 150 Class 1 bicycle parking spaces and 30 Class 2 or Class 3 bicycle parking spaces. Also, as Nick mentioned, at the intersection of George Mason and 16th Street, we'll be installing and funding Capital Bike Share Station. This summarizes the existing transit facilities in the area. I'll highlight the ART 52 and the ART 51 that both parallel and have stops directly in front of the hospital. They both run on 30-minute headways, and they alternate about 15 minutes. So generally speaking, there's a bus coming to the hospital about every 15 minutes. The ART 52 bus runs from Ballston Metro to East Falls Church Metro. The ART 51 line runs from the intersection, generally speaking, the intersection of Lee Highway and George Mason back to Ballston. There's only one stop between Ballston Metro and the hospital, so this is the most efficient route for them to get to and from the Ballston Metro. This is a slide that summarizes the existing bicycle facilities in and around the site. You can see the teal or bluish color that parallels George Mason. That's on-street sharrows, essentially. As you go south, closer down towards 66 and the Custis Trail, there are some marked bike lanes once you get towards Lacey Wood Park. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Justin, to go through the TDM portion.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, as Mike indicated, my name is Justin Shore. I'm with Wells & Associates. I lead our TDM practice, and we're a team of people that deal with TDM implementation, planning, and monitoring and evaluation. And I only bring that up to say that when we work on this proposed TDM program, we're looking at the end in mind. We're looking at what actually works in practice and what can be used to demonstrate measurable results. So there have been several coordination meetings with Arlington Transportation Partners, with the ES staff, and with VHC to discuss the potential TDM measures. And as a response to all of those discussions, this TDM plan was drafted. And what I'm going to walk you through today is the various sections and components of what we have outlined in that plan as a commitment to help with alternative transportation to the site. So the plan starts with the end in mind. by defining how to measure success using two key objectives. The first one is really to measure success by saying the employee parking demand will be less than this parking supply. And ultimately here, the goal is to make sure that there's no employee parking spilling out beyond the confounds of the campus into the neighborhood. The other main objective is to reduce single occupancy vehicles below what the current SOV rate is now. The goal here is to improve. We're already actually doing some pretty good things at the hospital with regard to getting people there without driving, and our goal is to do better than what is happening now. So really the most important thing, I guess, to look at is how will VHC achieve the objectives. And there's a 5-tier approach that follows the standards of Arlington County's TDM conditions. And the 5 key approach methods are, as you probably know very well, participation and funding. You've probably seen all these facilities and improvements, carpool and vanpool parking, promotion services and policies, and performance and monitoring. And so what we're going to do is walk you through all of the different strategies that are being proposed, and which ones are more of a standard condition that you probably see a lot of, and what is going above and beyond what is typical. And that's highlighted in red as we go through each slide. So in focusing on the first tier, participation and funding, the first element of that is to establish an ongoing relationship with ATP and making sure there's a constant dialogue and opportunity to discuss TDM elements. The second piece that's very significant is, as Nick mentioned, the provision of a designation and maintenance of a full-time on-site TDM coordinator, somebody to be completely responsible to make sure that this TDM program is implemented and maintained on an ongoing basis. Third element is the annual contribution to ACCS of $20,000 per year for 30 years. The fourth one, again, is something that goes beyond the typical or standard conditions, and it's to begin the actual implementation of the program upon issuance of the full building permit. Really to focus on seeing some progress in advance of the garage opening. The intent here, typically these types of programs, as you know, are not happening until, certificate of occupancy. So this is a significant addition, trying to really leverage the fact that we have people already on campus that we can begin getting in the right behavior as the garage is constructed. The second tier is facilities and improvements, and 2 standard elements that will be addressed: transportation information display in the main lobbies across the hospital campus. This may take the form of things like a transit screen or something like that, showing real-time information about not just transit, but other modes of transportation that are available in the area. And then providing bicycle facilities management plan within the transportation management plan. And Mike talked about a lot of those elements already, the quantities of parking, et cetera, that are being provided. The third tier is carpool and vanpool parking. And of that, the key element is operating in the carpool vanpool program. There's a number of conditions that deal with carpool and vanpool, sometimes separately. They're combined here, but they work synergistically. The first one is to provide a minimum of 2 carpool/vanpool spaces that'll be marked at the time of initial occupancy. And we see that this supply may modify over time, depending on what demand is. But it's a commitment to start there and evolve as we see demand may grow. The second piece, and this is pretty significant, is the provision of carpool vanpool pricing incentives consistent with the parking cash out program. If you're not familiar with what parking cash out is, it's essentially saying, look, there's a value to a parking space. We're going to, instead of giving you that parking space, we're going to give you a cash value for that space, and you can no longer use that space. You're basically forgoing the right to use that space. You'll get some money for it. How you get to campus with that money is up to you. That money can be used to buy a transit pass. It can be used to buy a capital bike share pass. We're not going to micromanage how you use it, but what you cannot do is arrive to campus in your car. And, we're discussing different ways that can be done. That may be done, through restricted access, through key fobs and other things at the gate. The fourth tier is promotions, services, and policies. And there's a number of elements involved in that. The first one is to distribute site-specific information to VHC employees. That can be everything about the bus routes that are in the area to bike share, whatever options are available. They're going to constantly be changing, and it would be the role of the transportation coordinator that we mentioned earlier to stay on top of that and keep that up to date. The second one I alluded to earlier, the parking cash out, but under the promotions part, it's important not just to have it for carpools and van pools, but for all modes of transportation. I kind of jumped ahead to give you the explanation. But a key element here is to establish and promote the fact that that's available. It doesn't really do us any good if nobody knows that it's available. And it's strictly for VHC employees who work on campus. Those are the employees that we have control over. And I'll talk about what we'll do for the non-hospital employees a few bullets down. Third piece is providing a sustainable commute benefit program for each on-campus employee directly employed or contracted by VHC. And again, you may know commute benefit programs, can be tax benefits and other things, but we can't control who provides it. We can only do that for our employees. But the next bullet is what we can do for the other non-hospital organizations located on the campus, and that's promote the availability of pre-tax commuter benefits and encourage them to implement and offer it to their employees. The fifth element is the provision of transportation information heading on the hospital's website. And so really, this is pretty standard condition, but making sure that there's links to the most up-to-date ACCS information, web pages externally, and describe the key transportation benefits that are available to people coming to the site. The fifth tier of our approach for TDM is performance monitoring and evaluation. And I think, we talked about the objectives and measuring it. It's important to be able to measure it, and so that's factored into here as well. So during the first year of the startup of the TMP, and on an annual basis thereafter, VHC will submit an annual report. So, what you're seeing is essentially from the moment the TMP is implemented, you're going to continually hear what's going on with this program on a regular basis. The developer also agrees to reimburse the county $17,500 and participate in a campus-wide transportation and performance monitoring study at 2 years, 5 years, and each subsequent 5 years at the county's option. So again, this is after the issuance of the first partial certificate of occupancy, and again, a fairly standard condition. That's all we have on the TDM side.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. Does county staff have their own presentation to add?
And after that, we do have one speaker.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Dennis Sellen. I'm with the Department of Environmental Services, and I'm here to present a staff presentation for the Virginia Hospital Center Expansion Project. This is a rezoning application, a major site plan amendment, and a use permit amendment. I will try not to duplicate information that's already been provided by the applicant unless there is a specific county staff perspective on this. This is a 5.6 acre addition to the existing Virginia Hospital Center site, which, as the applicant has described previously, is located about 1.6 miles northwest of the Boston Metro Station and is bordered by 3 civic associations: John M. Langston, Terra Leeway Heights, and Waycroft Woodlawn. This figure shows the existing hospital site. It's about a 16.5 acre site outlined in white. And the Edison, what is known as the Edison site, currently owned by Arlington County, at 5.6 acres, is immediately to the north, outlined in yellow. This figure also shows how the hospital is located in the midst of and surrounded by single-family residential neighborhoods, and I think that's an important consideration that we have been dealing with throughout this entire project, especially with respect to transportation. A bit of background for you. Previous relevant county board actions at this site, or the most recent, is that in the year 2000, there was a site plan amendment to build the hospital tower and the associated parking with that. In the year 2015, there was both a letter of intent and an option to purchase with regard to the Edison site, and that agreement was signed between Arlington County and the Virginia Hospital Center. More background on the project itself and its process. The kickoff for this project began last November, formally, with a community meeting. Subsequent to that, there were 6 meetings of the Site Plan Review Committee held between December 2017 and May of this year, and then they were concluded with 2 community open houses held in the month of June. Additionally, the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development has maintained a website for this project since its inception, and which all materials that have been submitted for the project have been maintained and are on that website. And there's also all the comments that we've received are maintained on the website, as well as an FAQ section. So there has been a significant amount of public information and involvement for the process. So the existing hospital site is zoned SD, and that is a designation which does permit hospitals and related medical and healthcare uses. It's proposed to rezone the Edison site from S3A Special District to SD in order to align the zoning on both sites and to permit the hospital and the medical activities on the Edison site. The applicant's proposal is to, of course, incorporate the Edison site into the site plan, and to expand the hospital by building a 241,000 square foot outpatient medical facility, a 1,740 space parking garage. And additionally, the hospital would convert 120,000 square feet of existing medical offices in the southern portion of the site to hospital use. The long-term plan for this site is that all hospital purposes would be on the southern half of the site, and the northern half of the site would be for medical offices and outpatient use. Although the project is not covered by any sector plan, we still, as always, refer to the Master Transportation Plan and seek to align the project as much as possible with existing MTP policies. And I've just outlined a number of the policies in which we have seen that the hospital is in particular accordance with, and I don't need to outline those, but just to give you the assurance that we have considered the MTP in the entire process of reviewing this project. A brief overview of the project. Some of these items have already been covered by the applicant. I will go over the major changes and improvements. As the applicant has said, there's a consolidation of the site entrances and curb cuts from 8 down to 5. Revised street sections for all the 3 major streets surrounding the site, improvements for pedestrians, bicycle improvements, relocation of transit stops and shelters. Specific bicycle and pedestrian improvements are the widening of sidewalks on all of the streets surrounding the site, 765 linear feet of new sidewalk on the east side of North Edison Street between 19th Street North and 17th Road, safety improvements at North George Mason Drive and 19th Street North. We have heard a lot of concern about pedestrian safety at that intersection. Improved pedestrian wayfinding throughout the site, better wayfinding and signage and circulation, more bicycle parking, as the applicant has already described, and better bicycle parking as well. Improved facilities for the cyclists, as many as 12 showers per gender, that's still under discussion, and up to 300 bicycle lockers. In addition to the new 15-dock capital bike share station on site, and the applicant has agreed to provide funding for both the installation and for 10 years of operations, and maintenance. I will go over briefly some of the findings of the transportation study that was conducted last year, amended in December, most recently in December of 2017. For trip generation, there are currently 1,114 AM peak hour trips, 806 PM peak hour trips, and then I show the ins and the outs there. And the proposal is for an increase to 1,494 AM peak trips, 1,193 PM peak trips. That translates into an additional 380 more trips in the morning peak and 387 additional trips in the PM peak. And we need to remember that these trips would be spread across the multiple access points to the site. And just as a point of reference, these additional trips means about one additional vehicle every 10 seconds. Additional findings from the transportation study. They did look at 16 intersections, both signalized and non-signalized. There are currently some areas of concern already, and however, all of the study intersections would continue to operate at the level of service similar to today in both the evening and the morning and the evening peak hours, with the exception of the northbound left turn lane at George Mason Drive and Lee Highway, which goes to level of service E, and the eastbound and southbound left turn, George Mason Drive and Washington Boulevard, which is to the south of this site. This goes to level of service E. And westbound 19th Street North at George Mason Drive, that goes to level of service F in the AM and PM peak. And remember that westbound 19th Street is to a dead end. There's a one-block dead end west of George Mason Drive. The applicant has proposed mitigation, and that includes a traffic signal at the proposed hospital entry, modifications to the signal timing and the signal phasing, and lengthening the turn lanes on North George Mason Drive to prevent stacking at those intersections. Site access was a point of major discussion throughout the project, and I want to go over that briefly. As the applicant has said, they will be consolidating the access points. It says 7, it should be from 8 to 5. The public access to the site would be primarily from the new entrance off of North George Mason Drive. The applicant has proposed an entrance that aligns with the driveway into the new parking garage. The county staff had preferred a signalized entrance located further south at the intersection with 17th Street North, with a secondary right-in, right-out at the location where the applicant is proposing their primary entrance. Based upon further analysis and study of the county staff, while we do prefer the signalized entrance further to the south, we do agree with the applicant's assessment and analysis that their location and configuration would operate successfully and safely and cause no deterioration of traffic service. Additionally, that the access impacts to the adjacent residents would be minor. I'm going to show you just few examples of some of the changes to the street sections. The applicant has described them already. This shows them in section, North George Mason Drive. The primary changes to this, while there's no change to the right-of-way, which is about 61 to 63 feet, there would be a significant widening of the pedestrian median refuge as in the points where it is necessary, and this is particularly at the places of pedestrian crossing, which is at the hospital entrance and at 19th Street North. At 19th Street, that would widen from current 5 feet to, 5 feet to 9 feet. The sidewalk on the hospital side of George Mason will be widened from 5 feet to 10 feet with the addition of a 6-foot wide median, which currently does, or 6-foot wide planting strip, which currently does not exist. 19th Street North would go from a 30-foot yield street, which of course means that two vehicles in opposing directions cannot pass each other, to a 36-foot wide neighborhood street with two vehicular lanes and parking on both sides of the street. And this also would have a sidewalk on the hospital side of the street widened from 4 feet to 6 feet with the addition of a 5-foot planting strip where there's currently a 2-foot wide landscape strip. Similarly, North Edison Street, while this street section would not be widened, what would be added to the street would be a new 6-foot wide sidewalk on the east side of the street between 19th Street North and 17th Road North. This would not impact the front yards of any of the neighbors. This would be taken from hospital right-of-way so that it's not intruding into the front yards of neighbors. It's adding on and then shifting the street slightly to the west. Similarly to the other streets, the sidewalk would widen from 4 feet to 6 feet with a 5-foot planting strip, replacing the 2-foot wide landscape strip. I apologize for the translation of my PowerPoint. This often happens. The on-street parking, there are currently 110 parking spaces on the 4 streets surrounding the project site, George Mason, 19th Edison, and 16th. This would be reduced to 87 parking spaces, and that's a loss of 23 on-street parking spaces. And we feel that those would be made up, more than made up, by the addition of new parking spaces in the proposed new parking garage. This is a review of the parking spaces that are being provided by the hospital, and comparing that to the zoning requirement in Arlington County zoning ordinance. And as the applicants described, they are providing fewer parking spaces than are required by the zoning ordinance. And the applicant has also stated that the garage would be 6 levels above grade with a maximum height of 66.8 feet. The entrances to the garage would be from George Mason Drive from the general public, 19th Street for the staff, and North Edison Street for physicians. The applicant has really covered very well their TDM program. I think it's important to note that this is a TDM program that's much more robust than what they have today. The applicant has also, which is always required after site plan approval, they have submitted their transportation management plan before the project's approved, and as they have said, they are ready to go prior to construction of the project, and that's another thing that is unusual and is welcome here. So in conclusion, the staff is recommending approval of this project as specified in the staff report. If you like, I can read to you what the recommendations are. I will just outline them for you. It's consent to include the land swap. It is adopting of the ordinance to rezone, and it's adopting of the site plan amendment and the use permit amendment. And that concludes staff presentation.
All right, let's have our speaker.
Mr. Jerez.
VHC's proposal for the hospital's expansion is not good planning and is especially not good transportation planning. VHC is located in the neighborhood of appreciating single-family homes, i.e. tear-down McMansions. The neighborhoods are not the Halls Hill of 20 years ago. Neither are Westover and Leeway Overlea as they were 2 decades ago. Workforce housing for hospital employees has been gentrified out of Arlington for many years, a big reason for the current traffic to and from the hospital. Second, population growth and VHC patient growth. Arlington's resident population is growing by 2,500 to 3,000 per year. In addition, VHC markets itself to jurisdictions outside Arlington, McLean, Great Falls, Falls Church, where VHC is the most convenient provider of inpatient and outpatient health care. How many residents versus non-residents will utilize VHC as its primary hospital health care provider? Something you should really consider. It appears that VHC will be a de facto regional medical center, as Longbridge will be a regional aquatic center, and 4 Mile Run Valley will be a regional arts, sports, recreation complex. Arlington government is not only addicted to new urbanism, growth for the sake of growth, but is moving to total urbanization and to being a regional provider for many services. Again, how many residents versus non-residents does VHC intend to serve? What effect will Lee Highway redevelopment have on future traffic? Another important question you should ask. Finally, I and others question VHC's overall management and financial planning, given the wealthy and influential persons who are and have been VHC's benefactors. Specifically, VHC's wealthy benefactors have the ability to remediate deficiencies in VHC's behavioral health facility if they so choose. Their names are on plaques on the walls around the hospital. What is really needed is a new community hospital serving McLean, Great Falls, Drainesville. But the new urbanist developers, planning attorneys, consultants, contractors who live in McLean, Great Falls, and Drainesville will never allow that to be even considered by Fairfax County government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. All right, it's with the commission now. Who wants to start things off with questions for either the applicant or for staff?
Well, you're looking at me, so.
Commissioner Clement, go ahead.
All right. Well, first, I am very impressed with the concessions that VHC has made. These concessions are obviously made in good faith. Whether you think they're adequate or not, they're made in good faith, and that puts VHC in a class by itself as far as I'm concerned, because most of the developers here are not interested in making concessions. They know they can get what they want. So I do appreciate that. And I appreciate the design of the immediate site. My principal concern are traffic impacts at Lee Highway and George Mason and Washington Boulevard and George Mason, which are the main intersections. And I was annoyed in the transportation impact analysis, which deprecated the importance of those intersections, saying they were minor signalized sections. And in fact, they are the major sections of the neighborhood. However, I also note that VHC has proposed a lot of mitigation, a lot of traffic mitigation. And so I'm inclined to give it the benefit of the doubt, but I would love to hear from other commission members on this particular point. That is, do you acknowledge that there are going to be impacts? Do you agree that those impacts are significant or insignificant? And what do you think about the mitigation?
I'm a little bit interested here as well. I would love to hear from the applicant exactly what the letters can be deceiving in level of service. How much more delay are we actually talking about? And also, can you speak to what extent the TIA was updated when you changed your submission to include less parking and consolidation of entrances, and whether the findings in the TIA that we were given are, to what extent they're still accurate and applicable?
So we made an initial submission back in June, right around the time of the first submission of the traffic study, or of the 4.1, and then it was updated in December. We made, since the December submission, we've been working with staff and providing alternative analysis, one for an option that they had suggested, as well as the currently proposed option, and those memos were submitted to staff through the process. Specifically at the intersections of George Mason and Lee Highway, as well as George Mason and Washington Boulevard, we did identify potential optimization of signal timings and some timing improvements that could be done to even reduce some of the delays while the overall levels of service at those intersections were acceptable. The net differential in overall delay at those intersections, even without any kind of timing improvement, just looking at the study here, is approximately 4 seconds per vehicle during the AM peak hour, and approximately 2 seconds per vehicle during the PM peak hour. That's at Lee Highway in George Mason. At George Mason and Washington Boulevard, you're looking at a slightly higher increase. During the AM, it's approximately 9 seconds and about 8 seconds in the PM. But again, those are still operating at overall LOSD, which is acceptable. And we did identify timing improvements at both of those intersections, that the splits and the offsets could be optimized to help mitigate even that minor incremental increase in delay.
Thank you. Other commissioner questions? So I have one. We were provided some supplemental materials in advance of this meeting that include some master plan slides for the hospital, but those weren't mentioned at all throughout the presentation or anything. Can you talk some about that master plan and how, for instance, the parking garage will continue to interact with the hospital as those changes happen over the next however many years of that master plan?
It wasn't in our presentation, but we have a slide.
I'm sorry. For clarification, do you need do we provide that, or?
So we were provided the slides I have in our electronic materials. I'm just trying to understand how this project will continue to serve transportation-wise as the hospital changes according to this master plan. I'm somewhat thrown because usually when a site is expected to have phases and change over the course of 20 or 30 years, we don't do individual site plans. We do a phased development plan so we can understand how it's going to change over time, but that doesn't appear to have happened here.
Sorry, I'm trying to get this to work. I bet you can.
One more time. We can see from here when it's on. Okay. You're on.
There we go. Well, so to clarify, at least while they're pulling up the slide, and then I'll let the hospital speak to kind of the future and what they're planning as far as, what this garage is going to serve, what's going to happen with, existing parking facilities and whatnot. So we provided a master plan over the summer as part of our discussions with the county during the deferral period of how we could, provide more detail on really what was the hospital's vision going forward for this site. It's not meant to be a binding document. It's not something the county board is going to adopt with this approval, but it's a plan for the future, a conceptual plan. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the site plan conditions we committed to with the next phase of development at the hospital, we will file a phase development site plan that will be required. I think that initially when this project sort of arrived, it never really triggered in our minds, what would we do this? I mean, it's not, Pentagon City or something like that. We wouldn't, that's the context, or, like a Rosalind Plaza type thing. That's a context in which we think of for a phase development site plan. And lo and behold, with the amount of acreage we've added, we are just over that minimum acreage to do a PDSP. And so with the future phases, I think it's most likely the next future phase, maybe the central utility plant. With that phase, it would be required per the conditions to do a phase development site plan. And that would really obviously lay out for, you know, the county, for the public, for everyone, at least the sort of conceptual vision. And as all of you may or may not be used to from having seen different PDSPs come through, we would then have to go to final site plan on each phase of that, but it would at least be guided by those principles that would be established in the PDSP. So now that we brought up the master plan, Adrian and Charles, if you want to just address how parking might evolve over time.
I think what we like about this, or where this garage is sited in the interaction, as you can see on the master plan, that you get a future ring road with a campus. The idea is to get our traffic off of the neighborhood streets. You know, currently, if you come in off the main entrance of the campus and make a right and head toward the 1625 building, you reach a dead end if you're a patient. So if you go the wrong way as a patient, you're at a dead end. You've kind of got lost. You got to kind of turn around. So the idea is you can see that ring road will continue around the campus. So regardless of which entrance you make on George Mason, you can take that ring road back around and either go into the new garage, proposed garage, or keep circling the loop and get back to your destination that you needed. So I think that for the future master plan, obviously that garage will be there, and then it allows us to, you can see the beginnings of that ring road, that service road, and eventually once we replace the utility plant, which kind of precludes us now from doing that due to underground diesel tanks and our central utility plant that's there with generators and things, that in the future when we do take the green garage down and hopefully put that future central utility plant kind of more internal to the site, that will provide us with that ring road that'll interact with that new proposed garage.
Thank you, that's helpful. Commissioner Lantalmy?
When the green garage goes down, where are those cars going to go?
Well, we hope into the new existing garage, and
Well, you're
over
already
time.
saying that the new garage, even with the new garage, you're theoretically underparked for the whole site, which includes the green garage. So when the green garage goes down, you're even deeper in the hole.
Well, I think the idea is potentially the 1715 building could go as well, or, you know, obviously this is an approach that over time is going to happen. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to make any commitments to anything right now.
It's a conceptual plan, and I think that there's a few options here. One would obviously be replacing it with, if additional parking was merited in some fashion, building parking, but also, you know, there's a TDM plan in place with this approval that we want to minimize the need for parking on the site. And if we're looking off, you know, in the future, several years, you know, we're going to reassess at that point. And the point of this is really just to show conceptually what will happen. And again, I think the hope is that we're in a better situation with parking as well.
See, that's why I would have wanted a PDSP from the start, so that all of this could have been tracked out, and we would have better information as to what is reasonable and what may not be. I think this is a big flaw not having the PDSP. Now, that said, I do want to say that the Virginia Hospital Center expansion is something that is necessary. Everybody, I think, certainly I am on board with that. My understanding is most of the babies in Arlington are born here. In your facility, almost most of the, when our residents have hospital needs, they come to VHC. They don't go outside the county. So clearly, this is one of the premier entities within the county. We want this to be done right, though, and that's why I really strongly feel that the PDSP should have been here in the first place, so we can track out how this is going to work, how this is going to affect the neighborhood around it over the coming years, rather than sort of, well, something's going to happen, we're not quite sure how it's going to work. We'd like to know that a lot better.
Commissioner Clement?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Mr. Lantelme. I think his concerns are totally legitimate, but I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations myself, and what I found out was this. First of all, I took the numbers that the TIA gave me about the existing square footage and the net increase after development, but minus the Edison site. Okay, and that net increase was about 19%. So I took the existing parking facilities parking spaces as they exist on and off site, added to that a deficit that the TIA calculated, and the relocation of the existing off-site parking. And the result of all this was a requirement of 2,977 parking spaces with the increase in development. Now, I agree that's a very conservative estimate. It's not a liberal estimate. But what I'm saying is it is definitely within the realm of reason. And it is clear that the parking to be provided will exceed that amount. So what I'm saying is that though it is the case that the county's ordinance requires more space, and that you have not met that requirement, nevertheless, the ordinance itself is probably old, hasn't been amended, and has not contemplated the increase in density of the county, as other parts of the ordinance have. And I think Chris can probably, or other members of the commission can confirm that. So what I'm saying is I do believe that the parking to be provided is adequate right now and may prove to be adequate well into the future.
Commissioner Price.
I want to thank you all for your presentation. I also want to thank the staff for its presentation. What can I say? VHC is a valued member, valued employer, and a valued member of Arlington County, and just we want to let you know you are appreciated here. I also appreciate the fact that you came back and adjusted your plan and came up with a TDM plan, which is pretty, it's impressive. I don't have anything to compare it to. Other employers of similar size, would have been nice to see what the comparison is, but, it is what it is. You mentioned the parking cash out as part of the TDM. Has then been sort of a range or a back of the envelope number as to what that might be per employee? Because again, I was one of the original members of this Transportation Commission who was very concerned that you didn't charge employee parking. I found that, I was shocked by that. So I'm enthusiastic about this parking cash out, and I'm just curious if you have a value on that for anybody.
Yeah, currently right now our non-VHC, the non-Virginia Hospital Center practices on campus, their employees, they pay to park on campus. So we kind of took that, we charge them $50 a month to park on, their employees to park on campus. So we're going to take that as a kind of a starting point for us to provide our employees a cash out, either Metro subsidy, capital bike share at a $50 per month if they agree to take other mode of transportation to the campus. So I think that's going to be our starting point. Obviously this is going to evolve over time. If we don't see that we're getting the participation we need, we can make adjustments to that over time, but I think that's going to be our starting point, is where we've kind of valued our space on campus for employees to park.
Thank you very much. Again, my family's been, members of this community for 40 years, and Virginia Hospital Centers, thumbs up.
I want to ask a clarifying question. Did you say that it would be to Capital Bike Share or Metro, or will it be $50 to them in a check or a debit card that they get to use? Okay, because if I'm riding my bike or walking or carpooling, that's a very different situation.
The intent is that it won't be cash, because what we don't want them to do is take the cash, park in the neighborhood, and then walk to the campus.
So I'm concerned by that, because when I think about the litany of options, if I'm someone who lives relatively close by, I currently work in the district and live in Arlington, and I get to work about 3 or 4 different ways a week. And if you're making my cash out parking, which, by the way, free parking doesn't exist where I work, if you're making it mode dependent, you are significantly limiting my ability to not drive to work. Because the second you tie me to another mode, I might just say, not worth it, because one day I'm going to want to bike to work, another day I'm going to want to take the Metro, another day I'm going to hitch a ride with my coworker who lives close by me. And if you're making me say, well, I have to dedicate all of this money to Metro, that's not really as appealing to me as I get to dedicate it to my coffee every morning or my pedicure once a month, because it's my reward that I didn't drive. And that, for me, is very concerning in creating a viable and incentivized TDM program.
The point is well taken. I think, we're looking to really, at the end of the day, get people to not drive to campus. There's any number of ways you can do that. Sometimes it makes sense to have it direct deposited into your Smart Trip card. Sometimes it does. Sometimes people want flexibility like you. I think the key here is to be able to be flexible and apply it in different ways. As Charles mentioned, that's a starting point. I think just, first of all, in terms of dollar value, we're going to see how that works, but also in terms of ways to administer it. Quite honestly, you alluded to this, parking cash out is most typically applied in an environment where people are already paying for parking. And so there's a more, what's being applied here is somewhat experimental nationally, certainly within Arlington County, that there is no price that employees are paying, and yet a cash value is being given to those employees. So I think we're going to have to look at this and assess it over time. But point completely well taken. I'm one of those people, especially when Metro was under construction this summer, that used all kinds of modes of transportation to get to work, depending on what was most convenient. I think we want to make sure we can do that for employees as well.
Yeah, I just want to associate myself with Commissioner Culkin's remarks here. I mean, especially don't call it a cash out if you can't get cash. That's just bad nomenclature. But that's like nothing changes people's behavior like the ability to get money to use however they want. Metro, tax-free Metro Smart benefit is great, and getting a Capital Bike Share membership is lovely. But people are increasingly, like Commissioner Culkin's, changing the mode they use to get to work every day. And the cash is the ultimate in flexibility there. Commissioner Wadsworth.
Just one real quick comment on that. Cash gets taxed, so it becomes a lot smaller if you give it to them in cash compared to a smart trip or another method. I mean, I just point out the last time we were here talking about this 2-3 months ago, I think everybody here was pretty much against the plan they had because, we were talking, the applicant was pointing out, we can't be an employer of choice if we don't have parking for everybody and if the parking's not free. And now we're at a much smaller parking garage plan, a TDM plan. So radical change. I think we got 90% of what we recommended. So, I don't think it's our role to prescribe specific solutions or methods of getting there, or to, encourage the right kind of performance. So I'm ready to vote yes.
I have a couple small questions still to go. I really appreciate the new 19th Street pedestrian connection, but that one rendering was not super illuminating. Can you talk some more about what that feels like to walk through? How wide is this thing? How tall is it? What materials are inside? Like, what is it? Does this feel like? Is it a tunnel? Is it sort of outside, sort of not? I have literally no sense of what it would be like to walk through this pedestrian connection.
So it's a 6-foot pedestrian path that goes and it'll connect you from 19th Street in and into the kind of like the garden area, and then you can continue on to the north-south. So it's just a separated kind of pedestrian, but it's a 6-foot sidewalk, so it's bigger than your typical, when you're in a parking structure and you have those kind of narrow sidewalks as you're walking along the parking structure. It's a 6-foot protected sidewalk that'll lead you to the garden that's in the middle, and then all the way to the east-west connector.
Okay, and it's within the parking structure.
Correct.
And
It is
like,
within.
so
The
you,
building and the structure actually meet, so patients can get, if you're on surgery, you can park on the second level and get into the second level, into each level of the garage. So they're actually connected and joined structurally.
So there's like a concrete wall on one side and cars
Correct.
nearby on the other side. Okay, great. That's very helpful. I could not picture it prior to this. Thank you. Actually, I think that's all I had too. Any other questions from Commission? This has come a tremendously long way from a transportation perspective, and I really applaud that. I really thank you. I think the parking cash out program is huge and potentially precedent setting in Arlington County in a way that we have not seen before in a TDM program. I greatly appreciate the seemingly minor change from an 8-foot to a 10-foot side path on George Mason Drive. I think the consolidation of entrances around the site is going to be huge for people walking around the site, not having to cross so many driveways. Is very understated. The amount of additional trees along the sidewalks for people walking around is going to be a huge benefit. God, I wish it had been a PDSP from the outset. I think we would all be more comfortable understanding how the site is going to evolve over time and how this fits within that if it had been a PDSP from the beginning. I appreciate that you've committed to a PDSP going forward. So I'm comfortable with this as it is right now, despite wishing it had been a PDSP from the outset. So I'm going to get out the gigantic county manager's recommendation, unless somebody else wants to do this. Okay, here we go. I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board consent to include the county-owned land identified and located at 1800 North Edison Street in the rezoning application and site plan amendment. I recommend that the Transportation Commission recommend the Transportation Commission recommend the county board adopt the attached ordinance to rezone the property and adopt the attached ordinance to approve the subject site plan amendment to incorporate 1800 North Edison and a portion of 1701 North George Mason Drive into the site plan area, to permit construction of a new medical office building and a new parking garage, and to approve the subject use permit amendment to incorporate 1800 North Edison Street into the use permit area and to permit construction of a new medical office building and new parking garage, as outlined in our draft board report dated September 22nd, 2018.
Second.
Any further discussion? That I took the entire gigantic thing here and put it all into one gigantic motion. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And any abstentions? Is one opposed, all the rest in favor. Commissioner Lantelmi, do you want to speak any more about your opposition for the letter?
Well, I very much do acknowledge, as the rest of the commission obviously has, the major changes you've made. Adding the TDM is very good. So I absolutely acknowledge all of those. What I continue to be concerned about is looking forward to the future, and the master plan has not been vetted by the community. It was not through the SBRC process. I am continuing to be concerned about what you proposed here for transportation still be valid and useful going forward that just hasn't been explored. Because I don't have the sufficient information, that's why I'm not going ahead and voting in favor of this. Personally, I would have preferred to defer that so we would have had time to be able to explore that better and see how that fits into the future, how what you proposed here fits in with future plans.
Thank you to everyone for your time.
Our last item of the evening. Last item of the evening is other business. The only thing staff has to share, our next regular meeting is Thursday, October 4th. And of course, tonight we are on Wednesday because of Planning Commission meeting in this room.
All right. Any other commission business from commissioners, reports from liaisons? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.